distinguished permanent observers to the OAS, representatives of civil society, special guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and welcome. I'm pleased to call to order this special session of the Permanent Council, which has been convened in pursuance of Resolution AG/Res 2103 and in preparation for the special session of the General Assembly to be held on March 18, 2015. On that occasion, we will elect the new Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General of the Organization of American States. Delegations are reminded of the provisions in Resolution AG/Res 2103, which instructs the Permanent Council to, quote, invite the candidates put forward by member states for the positions of Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General to give a public presentation to this organization prior to the elections in order to describe in greater detail their proposals and initiatives they would undertake should they be elected, unquote. The same resolution also states that, quote, the presentation shall be made to the Permanent Council on a date to be set by said council, unquote. Esteemed colleagues, it is in this context that today the presentations by the candidates for the position of Assistant Secretary General of our organization will take place. The position of Assistant Secretary General of the Organization of American States is of high importance to our organization, especially to this council, from various perspectives. Apart from being the Secretary of the Permanent Council, the Assistant Secretary General shall serve as the advisory officer to the Secretary General and shall act as his delegate regarding all matters that the Secretary General may entrust to him. It is important to highlight that according to the charter of the organization, quote, during the temporary absence or disability of the Secretary General, the Assistant Secretary General shall perform his functions. Dear colleagues, today's agenda is based on the procedural guidelines for the presentations of the candidates for the positions of Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General of the OAS, as adopted on January 20th, 2015, and as contained in document CP/INF 7076/15. In accordance with these procedural guidelines, this meeting of the Permanent Council will start in the morning and continue in the afternoon. This part of the meeting will be devoted to the presentation of the candidate nominated by the Government of Guyana, namely His Excellency Ambassador Bayney Karran. Then, at 2:30 p.m., the Council will receive His Excellency Ambassador Nestor Mendez, the Permanent Representative of Belize, and the candidate nominated by the Government of Belize for his presentation. In accordance with the agenda, there will be a question and answer session after the presentation by each candidate. It is in this regard, distinguished permanent representatives, that I request the cooperation of all delegations in following the procedural guidelines as much as possible in order to make most of the time allotted to the special meeting of the Permanent Council. Ladies and gentlemen, before proceeding to the next item on our agenda, I would also like to mention that in accordance with Resolution AG/Res 2103, a dialogue between the candidates and the representatives of civil society organizations which are duly accredited to the organization will be held tomorrow in this room at 10 a.m. Esteemed colleagues, we will now proceed with the next item on the agenda, namely the presentation by His Excellency Ambassador Bayney Karran. Not yet. You have to be patient. Last July, Ambassador Karran was nominated for the position of Assistant Secretary General by the Government of Guyana, as reflected in the diplomatic note published as document AG/CP/INF 665/14. Ambassador Karran is well known in this council. He was appointed as Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Guyana to the United States of America and as the Permanent Representative of the OAS in December 2003. During his tenure as Permanent Representative of Guyana to the OAS, Ambassador Karran has held the positions of Chair and Vice Chair of the Permanent Council, Chair of the Committee of Hemispheric Security, and has participated in OAS missions to Ecuador, Haiti, China, and the Organization of African Unity in Ethiopia. Before being posted in the US and accredited to the OAS, Ambassador Karran has served as Guyana's ambassador to Venezuela and as non-resident ambassador to Chile, Colombia, and Ecuador. Currently, he is also accredited as Guyana's non-resident ambassador to Mexico, Panama, and Costa Rica. Over the past 2 decades, Ambassador Karran has participated as the head of Guyana's delegation or as senior delegate to numerous summits and ministerial meetings at important multilateral institutions, including to the General Assembly of the United Nations and the General Assembly of the OAS as well. He has also participated in the Summit of the Americas and in meetings of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, the Union of South American Nations, the Rio Group, the Caribbean Community, and the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization. Ambassador Karran was born in 1957. He was educated at the University of Guyana, the University of West Indies and Barbados, and at the Sir Hugh Wooding Law School in Trinidad and Tobago. Prior to his diplomatic appointments, he provided legal advice and representation to the public and also to private entities in civil and criminal proceedings, as well as pro bono legal services in the defense of human rights. Additionally, Ambassador Karran is a founder and director of the Guyana Legal Air Clinic, a nonprofit organization founded in 1994 to provide free legal services to the poor. Ambassador Karran, thank you for being with us today to share the proposals and initiatives that you would undertake should you be elected as the new as the new Assistant Secretary General of the Organization of American States. I'm very pleased to offer you the floor, and if you would like to address us through the roster. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, distinguished colleagues of the Permanent Council, permanent observers, alternates, members of staff of the OAS, members of the World Wide Web audience, ladies and gentlemen, I'm grateful for this opportunity to make this presentation to you on the proposals and initiatives which I would undertake if I should be accorded the honor to be elected Assistant Secretary General of the OAS. Firstly, I wish to acknowledge the valuable inputs and successes of Secretary General Jose Miguel Insulza and Assistant Secretary General Albert Ramden over their last 2 terms. Notwithstanding administrative and budgetary constraints, as well as political challenges, their deep commitment and their strength of purpose have advanced the work of the OAS in all areas. Secondly, it gives me pride that the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors has been able to produce not 1, but 2 worthy candidates for the position of Assistant Secretary General. His Excellency Ambassador Nestor Mendez has always been a respected CARICOM colleague. As we commence this phase of the quest upon which our two countries have embarked, I extend to him the same collegiality, camaraderie, and consideration that have characterized our numerous previous collaborations. Madam Chair, the OAS is indispensable to the integration process in our hemisphere. It is an institution that is vested with incomparable political, legal, and moral authority. In order for this organization to maintain its stature, it has to create incentives for member states to feel ownership, to appreciate its worth, and to achieve valuable results. Otherwise, member states will renege on their political commitments to this organization. In addition to these imperatives, the OAS faces challenges in the areas of management and modernization, many of which require prompt attention. Important as these may be, the issues relating to budget, administration, and efficiency of the organization are not its only problem. An equally difficult challenge are the political and ideological rifts within the hemisphere. Chair, in this presentation, I will consider the main areas of activity with a view to examining how collectively the member states and the General Secretariat should respond to the OAS's needs and challenges. In so doing, I shall be ever mindful of the key proposals contained in the Strategic Plan for Management Modernization, which has been proposed by the Secretariat. I also wish to elaborate for your consideration a set of management proposals of my own, which I believe would expand and improve on those already proposed. But first, let us examine the condition of the 4 pillars of the organization and then see what it is that member states would like the OAS to do. The flourishing of national democracies has enabled substantial economic gains and opportunities for our countries and peoples. Democracy is indispensable for peace, social development, justice, and equity. This requires perseverance in pursuing our collective commitments under the Inter-American Democratic Charter. It is equally vital to safeguard and strengthen the essential components of the exercise of democracy, even if significant sections of the population are disappointed that democracy has not delivered on their expectations. I firmly believe that we must enhance the capacity of the General Secretariat to monitor, anticipate, and head off potential threats to constitutional order in our member states by refining early warning systems and promoting dialogue mechanisms among all national stakeholders. We need to support efforts aimed at campaign finance reform, constitutional reform, and institutional strengthening, while at the same time increasing our assistance for elections processes and for the promotion of good governance. In short, we have to make democracy sustainable. But whereas upholding democratic norms has earned the OAS global recognition, the same cannot be said for the organization's achievements when it comes to integral development. The OAS has a fundamental obligation to assist member states to overcome the scourges of poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment. Our smaller and more vulnerable states, which comprise a substantial component of our membership, are not satisfied with our level of accomplishment in this area in spite of some significant successes. Most member states believe that we must be more proactive in addressing these challenges. Among the many inequalities that exist, the gap in education is the one that most negatively affects the destiny of each person. If we are to make real progress in the area of integral development, member states will have to commit to invest more in that pillar, both politically and financially. If elected as Assistant Secretary General, I would work closely with member states to find ways to raise more resources and to channel them into low-cost, high-impact development programs with a particular focus on education, to complement the larger programs of the multilateral development organizations. Chair, inequality, inequity, lack of economic opportunity, and poverty have a direct effect on political and social stability and citizen security. In this area, the OAS has made commendable strides. The creditable performance of the Secretariat for Multidimensional Security through SICAD, SICTE, and the Department of Public Security must be extended to ensure that public security is addressed more comprehensively. In the meantime, the OAS must continue to build hemispheric networks of cooperation, sharing of experiences and capacity building in order to combat the scourge of transnational criminal organizations. Moreover, the OAS can still play a central role in moving the hemisphere closer to consensus in the war on drugs and on immigration issues. The prioritization of security issues by member states would help lead to such consensus for action in the area of multidimensional security if member states should so desire. Notwithstanding recent advances in extending the promotion and protection of human rights, greater efforts are needed to combat injustices. Many member states wish to see far-reaching changes made to the institutions of the system, something which has caused much dissatisfaction. Should member states abandon the human rights system, it would be a major blow to that pillar of our organization. The new Secretary General should exert efforts to ensure that the system is improved and strengthened. This can commence with a renewed dialogue under the new OAS administration, starting with the human rights institutions and the member states. If elected, I would urge the new Secretary General to formulate proposals to ease the friction between member states and the inter-American human rights system. I would work accordingly with the new Secretary General and with member states in order to achieve this objective. The historic initiative by the United States and Cuba to normalize relations has the potential to significantly improve the tenor of future political discourse in our hemisphere. This would be a positive development, considering that lack of consensus at the OAS often stems from political differences. Member states should be prepared to welcome the participation of the government of Cuba in the councils of the hemisphere eventually. This development could lead to a significant reduction of political tensions in future, even though Cuba has shown little interest in rejoining the OAS. Time will tell whether going forward, greater trust would be engendered through dialogue and shared experiences. Until then, in our debates, the scars of history and the differences in political perspectives will continue to converge. They will continue to produce a lack of trust and lack of consensus on political matters. I look forward, however, to positive developments from the process underway. The year 2015 will mark a turning point for the OAS, because at this point in time, the organization finds itself at several junctions simultaneously. First of all, member states are determined that the organization must now be re-energized, refocused, and relaunched on a new path, both strategically and operationally. Secondly, we shall soon decide on the establishment of new systems of management. Thirdly, we are all agreed that the organization must revise its operational and programmatic procedures in order to strengthen and improve accountability, austerity, efficiency, effectiveness, prudence, and transparency. Fourthly, we need to resolve the question of mandate prioritization, the inadequacy of sustainable financing, and address the issues relating to human resources. Finally, in the space of a few months, we will be transitioning from an outgoing to an incoming administration. A similar combination of factors will not occur again for a long time to come. This unique situation presents a window of opportunity for the OAS. This opportunity must be firmly grasped. Otherwise, it may turn out to be irretrievably lost. Fresh winds of change are blowing over the organization, and we should take advantage of the moment and the momentum. Over the past several months, I've had the pleasure of conducting extensive consultations with member states. Virtually every permanent representative to the OAS has been a part of these discussions. I wish to thank you for sharing with me your concerns and your vision for the organization. A clear picture about the conditions that member states wish to see prevailing at the OAS has emerged from those consultations. Member states would like the next OAS administration to breathe new life into the organization. They're concerned that the influence and the authority of the OAS would diminish unless it is given a fresh impetus. Most member states are of the opinion that the Secretariat must strengthen collaboration with them through a more consultative and interactive relationship. Mandate prioritization, budgetary shortfalls, and management reform are the three key priorities to improve the functioning of the OAS. Moreover, the recurrent problem of quota payment arrears needs to be resolved. Member states ought to engage in a discussion over the collection of payments. The paradox of the OAS is that member states insist that the General Secretariat must discharge its responsibilities more effectively, but the same member states are unwilling to raise quotas so that these responsibilities might be so discharged. In order to resolve this dilemma, they would like the organization to better rationalize its resources. How the General Secretariat, and more specifically the new leadership of the OAS, respond to this paradox could affect how firmly member states remain committed to the organization. Most member states are also quite concerned about what the nature of the relationship between the incoming Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General would be. As has been previously noted, countries wish to see a greater focus on development. Besides, the smaller and more vulnerable states wish to feel that they have an equal voice and an equal standing in the Americas. The OAS is the principal platform to give them that voice. Member states also wish to see a greater synergy between the OAS and the other entities of the Inter-American system, and in particular, they would like the OAS to have a better relationship with international financial and development institutions. Member states feel that some of these goals would be better achieved by closing the perceived separation, which they believe, rightly or wrongly, to exist between the Permanent Council and the General Secretariat. Should I become the next Assistant Secretary General, I will do all in my power to ensure that this Permanent Council remains the center of gravity of the OAS and that no other agency wields influence at the expense of this council. Member states are convinced that in order for the OAS to be a beacon in the hemisphere for transparency and accountability in governance, then we in the OAS must first put our own house in order by improving the procedures for our internal accountability, transparency, and efficiency. Chair, turning now to the management of the organization. Concrete initiatives aimed at modernization and management reform have already been put in motion with the tabling of the strategic plan. However, this plan would not necessarily be adopted in its totality. I believe that implementing the following recommendations, which are contained in that plan, could bring about better financial management, increased resource mobilization, as well as increased efficiency and effectiveness. And these should be seriously considered by member states. Capital investments, indirect cost recovery, information and records management, the costing of mandates, reductions in the cost of ministerial meetings, and voluntary contributions from permanent observers. Taking the foregoing into account, I wish to put forward certain additional observations and recommendations for your consideration. If you consider them favorable, and if I have the honor to be elected, I would seek to work with the incoming Secretary General on the implementation of these proposals for the improvement of the organization. Some, but not all, have already been recommended in the strategic plan. In some cases, my recommendations go beyond what has been suggested in that plan, because they're intended to give additional guarantees for improved transparency, accountability, efficiency, and austerity. My recommendations relate to the following areas: the summit's process, resource mobilization, strengthening the Office of the Inspector General, establishment of the Office of an Ombudsman, national offices, promotion of dialogue and consultation among sub-regional groups and countries, institutionalizing the regional coordinators mechanism, a more dynamic relationship with observer states and international organizations, accountability for travel, and initiatives for human resource management. The implementation of summit mandates is a major area of responsibility for the OAS, and one that poses challenges to the Summit Secretariat and to the General Secretariat as a whole. There is need for a greater measure of coordination to ensure the effective and uniform implementation of summit mandates among the agencies of the Joint Summit Working Group and within member states. In order to improve the implementation of summit mandates, I propose that as part of the plan of action of the Summit of the Americas, member states should instruct the head of the Joint Summit Working Group institutions to meet in a special post-summit meeting to 1, lay out their individual plans for fulfilling mandates, and 2, elaborate a coordinated strategy where mandates overlap to capitalize on existing synergies, optimize resources, and reduce duplication of effort. The OAS Secretary General, as chair of the Joint Summit Working Group, should be charged with convening this high-level meeting within an appropriate time period after the summit. In this manner, the OAS would better fulfill its responsibilities by helping to ensure that decisions adopted by the hemisphere's presidents and prime ministers are being handled as action priorities at all levels with coordination, precision, and commitment. To better ensure follow-up and continuity in the summit implementation process, I would propose that following the Panama Summit, each summit host country should second a senior staffer to the Summit Secretariat for a period of 2 years, the year prior to the summit and the year after the summit. Member states which volunteer to host the Summit of the Americas would accept the secondment of a staffer to the OAS as part of their obligations as host. This would help to create a stronger Summit Secretariat without increasing the cost to the General Secretariat budget. Ensure that post-summit there is dedicated attention to the work of implementation, and further support continuous and open communication among key stakeholders and host country planners. In the years when summits take place, the General Assembly usually follows soon after, resulting in an overlap of effort as well as resources. I wish to propose that in those years when a Summit of the Americas is held, the regular session of the OAS General Assembly should be held at OAS headquarters. This would be an opportunity to maintain continuity around the policy dialogue and the thematic focus of the summit, and further consolidate and emphasize summit outcomes. It would also have the practical benefit of optimizing the personnel and financial resources of both member states and the Secretariat. In order to assist in bridging the revenue gap, I would propose that the organization should reinvent the idea of embarking on a program dedicated to increase revenue from sources additional to member state quotas. This program would aim to raise specific funds from member and observer states, financial institutions, development agencies, private entities, and other development partners. This scheme is already being practiced individually by multiple OAS departments in the case of specific projects. The organization can consolidate these activities within a specific unit, suitably staffed, to be located within the Secretariat for External Affairs. This is a more rational approach than the current system, where multiple OAS departments raise funds separately, generally from the same sources. This signals to donors and other stakeholders that we are disorganized. By putting more effective revenue collection systems in place and setting proper targets, this program should increase OAS-specific funds by several $1 million per year. I propose that these funds should be spent on targeted needs of the organization, which are to be decided upon by the member states. Such an initiative, if it is to be pursued, must follow international best practices. The mobilization of resources should not be confined only to raising cash. The political credentials of the OAS can be a useful counterpart to the technical and financial resources of other institutions in devising solutions to problems in the hemisphere, in areas such as climate change initiatives, education, developing energy security, improving disaster management, and strengthening democracy. Member states wish that the Office of the Inspector General to be as effective as possible in terms of checks and balances, satisfactory managerial oversight, and increased independence. The Inspector General should be accountable to a higher authority, independent from the one that he's watching over, in order to avoid the appearance of conflicts of interest. I would invite you to consider that it would be better for the Inspector General to be accountable directly to member states, perhaps through the CAP. The proposal in the management plan for the creation of the Office of an Ombudsman would further enhance the organization's transparency and accountability, as well as the security of its employees, by fostering a non-discriminatory environment. An ombudsman's office would also address complaints, solve grievances, and foster better relations among member states, the Secretariat, and staff members. An ombudsman would reinforce rules and ethics at the workplace, provide for more checks and balances, adherence to proper rules and procedures, as well as to lend further support to the management reform exercise. I would recommend to the incoming Secretary General to take steps expeditiously to create the Office of an Ombudsman. The management plan envisages a reduction of expenditure on national offices by nearly 1/3, and for the closure of certain national offices in situations where the organization's needs can be met through support from other national offices. Rather than implement such a sweeping decision, I would recommend that there first be a reevaluation and rearticulation of the role of these offices in order to bring them in line with the emerging needs and practices of the organization and of member states. The closure of national offices is a matter which involves political as well as financial considerations, and they both must be addressed simultaneously. The issue is of significance to too many member states to be addressed solely from a financial perspective. Until the issue is further examined, substantial savings can be achieved through measures such as the reduction of travel, the continued modernization of communications, and further collaboration by member states in operating national offices in their territories. It is the duty of the OAS to inspire greater dialogue and consultation among interested sub-regional groups and member states. In order to better provide for such opportunities, I would propose to the incoming Secretary General that a program of dialogue and consultation among the various sub-regional groupings of the organization be established under the aegis of the General Secretariat. Such a program would serve to promote dialogue, understanding, and consensus on issues of common interest, as well as to enhance intra-regional cooperation among sub-regional groups and countries of the OAS. I would propose that consideration be given to institutionalizing the regional coordinators mechanism. This consultative mechanism has been a valuable tool to manage negotiations and to facilitate consensus building, but often it is not fully utilized by the Permanent Council. An amendment to the rules to require the chair to consult with the regional coordinators on all vital matters to be brought before the Council should be considered by member states as a mechanism to help expedite the work of the Permanent Council. If elected, I would encourage the Secretary General to create an initiative aimed at obtaining more fruitful and extensive engagements with the permanent observer states, beginning with wide-ranging consultations with them all. The OAS should take advantage of the willingness of observer states to be more engaged with the organization. This initiative would seek to widen and deepen engagements both with active and inactive observers by exploring common agendas and areas of interest. To further increase transparency and accountability and build confidence between member states and the Office of the Assistant Secretary General, I hereby undertake that if elected, the travel schedule of the ASG and all members of that office would be submitted to the CAP voluntarily for prior information of that body. Furthermore, the nature and purpose of all travel undertaken by the ASG for which OAS funds have been expended would be fully reported to the member states through the Permanent Council. I would seek to persuade the incoming Secretary General that this example of accountability should be extended to the entire Secretariat. It is important for the incoming Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General, upon taking office, to immediately establish positive working relationships with Secretariat staff, particularly the senior management, and to provide inspiration to the entire labor force to work with complete enthusiasm for the common cause of the organization. If I happen to be elected, I would wish to see the incoming administration convene a meeting at the earliest opportunity after taking office between the Human Resources Department and the Staff Association in order to familiarize itself with outstanding issues and to assist the two sides in resolving any pending issues. I intend to recommend to the incoming Secretary General that the organization moves as early as possible to address the question of human resources. Key objectives would be to improve perceptions or erase misperceptions about the fairness, transparency, and integrity of the current procedures. The incoming administration would expect to receive reports about low staff morale, incidents of harassment, and the fairness of performance appraisals, which would all need to be addressed. Whistleblower protection, as in the case of the appointment of an ombudsman, promises to generate a higher level of confidence and security among employees because they would feel better protected. If I'm elected, whistleblower protection is a measure which I would wish to see established, and I would take steps to ensure that it is adopted. An important area of human resource management for any new OAS administration is to ensure that there is balance in the sub-regional and national origins of employees at the OAS. There are perceptions among some sub-regions and member states that their nationals are underrepresented in the workforce of this organization. These perceptions affect the attitude and the commitment of member states to the organization. Some member states would expect that they be addressed with urgency, particularly since His Excellency candidate Luis Almagro pledged to address this issue during his campaign. I am in support of measures to have this issue addressed to the satisfaction of member states. The Assistant Secretary General must have an intimate working relationship with the Secretary General that is based on mutual trust, mutual cooperation, and mutual respect. The SG and the ASG must be at one with regard to the mission and strategic objectives of the organization that they're elected to serve. Many member states are of the view that since both officials are elected as a team, there should be a political role for them both. All member states advocate a leading role for the ASG in managing the Secretariat, and most of them would like the ASG to also undertake political functions to complement the functions of the Secretary General. I am also of the view that it would benefit the organization for the Assistant Secretary General to play a strong and well-defined political role when necessary. The organization would function best if the Secretary General and the Assistant Secretary General can complement each other's strengths and weaknesses. Most member states do not agree that the Secretary General should allocate responsibilities to the ASG based on his sole whim and fancy. Member states can, if they so wish, determine a role for the ESG within the policy framework of the organization. Madam Chair, distinguished colleagues, I am confident that the implementation of whatever management and modernization plan member states eventually decide upon, if combined with these initiatives that I've suggested, would help transform the OAS into a more efficient, productive, and dynamic entity. I consider that the proposals which I've recommended would improve not merely the performance of the organization, but also its image and its esteem. Over time, this would translate into a more respected entity which generates deeper commitments on the part of its membership and its stakeholders. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran, for your elaborate presentation, whereby you outlined proposals and initiatives that you would undertake if you are elected as the new Secretary General of the organization. Esteemed colleagues, before starting the questions and answer section of our agenda, I would like to recall the attention of delegations to the procedural guidelines that we adopted on January 20th, 2015, whereby we all agreed on a number of procedures to enable a smooth conduct for our session. It is in light thereof that I would like to make a cordial request to delegations to keep their questions as much as possible to 1 minute or even less. I have to say that I am aware that this was not an easy undertaking during the previous meeting of the same nature. Nevertheless, I would like to ask delegations to raise specific questions which are based on the presentation of the candidate and to be mindful of the time in order to make the most of the time allotted for this session. A timely conduct of our session will also allow us to start in time with our next presentation, and that will be at 2:30 p.m. this afternoon, whereby the second candidate, namely the candidate of Belize, will make his presentation to the Council. Having said that, I would now like to offer the floor to delegations that wishes to pose questions to Ambassador Karran. And I see that there are already 2 countries that, well, some more, but let's start with Ecuador. I would like to offer the floor to the delegation of Ecuador.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Expreso mi agradecimiento al embajador Bayney Karran por su interesante y amplia presentación de sus propuestas para la OEA como candidato a la Secretaría General Adjunta. Una organización internacional de las dimensiones y características de la OEA, para el cabal cumplimiento de sus funciones, requiere, entre otras cosas, de una administración muy eficiente. El canciller Luis Almagro manifestó que, en caso de ser elegido como secretario general de la organización, trabajaría de la mano muy estrechamente con el secretario general adjunto, a quien lo concibe como un cosecretario general. En este sentido, deseo preguntar al embajador Karran cuáles considera que son los principales elementos que deben ser tenidos en cuenta para garantizar una administración eficiente del talento humano y de los recursos de la organización, qué falencias ha identificado y qué cambios considera necesarios con miras a lograr una cultura de gestión con base en los resultados que responda a las prioridades identificadas por los Estados miembros. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, delegation of Ecuador. I would like to offer the floor to Ambassador Karran to provide comments and answers to the questions raised by the delegation of Ecuador.
Well, thank you very much for that question, Ambassador. I think that it's a question that is on the minds of many delegates to the organization. Certainly in my consultations that I had in my preparations for presenting my candidature, this was certainly at the top of the list of most of the delegates. I think that I have pretty much answered the question in my presentation. I identified a number of areas in which management could be improved. We were talking about for instance, measures like the ombudsman, the Inspector General, to improve or to add the ombudsman, improve the work of the Inspector General. We were talking about resource mobilization. We were talking about managing the summit's process and the mandates process better. I think that the answer to your question really is the total package of management reforms that the organization is going to undertake, that is going to be decided upon by member states and executed by the Secretary General and the Assistant Secretary General. This is going to lead to the kind of management improvement that I think you're asking to be addressed. Certainly, I think that the candidate for Secretary General, he made this clear in his own presentation, and I think that member states like yours who are concerned about this aspect would definitely have something to look forward to in what's going to follow. I don't know if you want me to get into more specifics about specific managerial issues, but I do think that I did touch on them during my presentation. But I would be very happy to go into more detail if you like. Thank you.
I recognize the delegation of Venezuela. You have the floor.
Buenos días, gracias, Presidenta. Lo primero que nuestra delegación quiere reconocer, primero dándoles las gracias al embajador Karran por su presentación y reconocer su amplia, exitosa experiencia profesional. Venezuela tuvo el privilegio de tenerlo como embajador y eso lo agradecemos a su país y a su gobierno con habernos dado el honor de tenerlo en Venezuela. Hay que destacar que el embajador Karran, a través de una radiografía de la organización, ha hecho una mirada al futuro, pero una mirada sobre la base de identificar debilidades en la organización, pero con un valor añadido, y es que sobre la base de esas debilidades propone una serie de acciones para fortalecerla. Agradecemos muchísimo su presentación, el documento que nos distribuyó. Y sobre esa base, y muchos de los aspectos han sido abordados en su presentación y en el folleto que nos distribuyó. Sin embargo, nosotros quisiéramos que de resultar elegido como secretario general de la organización y en el contexto de la visión estratégica de la OEA, ¿qué acciones específicas de lo que usted ha señalado implementaría o impulsaría para fortalecer el rol consultivo del secretario general adjunto? Y esto con miras a ayudar a la organización a recuperar confianza por parte de los Estados miembros. Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, delegation of Venezuela. Ambassador Karran, I offer the floor to you.
Thank you very much for your kind comments. I think that, again, the question of trust by member states is something that is going to be developed from the approach, first of all, to management. Because I have, for instance, indicated that I'd be willing to perform my functions in a manner that is very open and transparent. By way of example, I have undertaken that all travel is going to be declared, in advance. So I believe that with this spirit of transparency and openness itself is going to lead to a change of perception. And there are going to be concrete initiatives. Again, for instance, putting in place measures for better transparency, accountability, and so on. I can go back again to the example of Ombudsman, Inspector General, and so on. As regards the how things are going to proceed thereafter, you need to bear in mind that I'm not going to be the Secretary General. The Secretary General is going to have his own initiatives, and these are things that the Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General would need to sit down to work out. What I can say is that looking at the platform of the sole candidate so far for Secretary General and looking at my platform that I've just outlined, I think that member states would have some degree of optimism that what they perceive to be a relationship between member states and the Secretariat that needs repair and needs improvement and needs a bridging of gap and needs better understanding and more collaboration and cooperation, I think that it's fairly clear that that is going to happen when the time comes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran. I recognize the delegation of El Salvador. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Madam Chair. La delegación de El Salvador se complace en participar en la presente sesión del Consejo Permanente, en tanto y por cuanto las presentaciones de los candidatos al cargo de Secretario General Adjunto se corresponden con la dinámica de los tiempos y la transformación de la organización. Mi delegación ha ponderado la presentación del embajador Bayney Karran, representante permanente de Guyana, y quisiera felicitarlo por tan excelente presentación. Y al mismo tiempo nos permitimos solicitar sus comentarios respecto a un asunto que mencionó en su discurso sobre los observadores permanentes. Nosotros consideramos que estos nexos con estos observadores son sumamente importantes, pero que todavía es una asignatura pendiente de la OEA, porque estos han sido evaluados puramente en términos financieros y consideramos que deben de haber otro tipo de valoraciones para considerar cuando un observador permanente puede ser admitido dentro de nuestra organización. La dinámica de triangulaciones, relacionamiento y diálogo que con ciertos observadores existe, consideramos que puede amplificarse y profundizarse por parte de los Estados miembros y órganos políticos de la OEA. Y lo vemos ya en otros organismos como Naciones Unidas que tienen observadores permanentes bajo diferentes categorías. Quisiera escuchar sus comentarios al respecto y entender qué es lo que buscaría ampliar con los observadores permanentes dentro de nuestra organización. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your comments and for your question. Ambassador Karran, I offer the floor to you to respond to the comments and the question.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Thank you for your kind remarks and for your question. I conceived the notion that the organization ought to do more with permanent observers because of basically because of two experiences that I had. I was part of a delegation of permanent representatives that was invited by the government of China to visit China in 2009, I believe it was. And I was able to see the interest that certain member states have in this organization, in the organization as a conduit to the Americas, to gain access to member states and to gain more knowledge about what is happening in the Americas. I later accompanied the Secretary General on an official mission to the Organization of African Unity, and I was able to see the value of collaborating with other international organizations and country member states of those organizations. And having dialogues with permanent observer states right here in Washington, I sense that there is a desire on the part of permanent observers to do more with the organization. I think that the OAS can be a platform for observer countries, especially the smaller observer countries who don't have a large presence in the Americas and who would like to explore means of cooperation, perhaps cooperation programs, even collectively and bilaterally. The organization could be a platform for dialogue with these members, with these permanent observers, and even the more established observer states that have regular representation at our council meetings and so on. I think there is a sense that we can probably do more with those countries. My idea is not only a financial, that we would be able to gain finances from them. Of course, if we get money, that's fine. But that's not the only objective. That's not the only purpose. I believe that in diplomacy, in international relations, you can never have too little dialogue. There is always room for more dialogue, and I think that this is the spirit behind which we can have a more interactive, more dynamic, and more mutually beneficial relationship with observer countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran. I would like to offer the floor to the Ambassador of Chile, Ambassador Lira. You have the floor.
Muchísimas gracias, estimada Presidenta. Deseo en primer término manifestar mis felicitaciones al representante de Guyana, al embajador Karran, por su completa presentación. Usted, distinguido colega, representa al único país anglófono de Sudamérica, que además tiene la característica de ser un país caribe amazónico. Eso lo hace un país muy especial, y el que en su capital se encuentre la sede del CARICOM habla del interés de sus habitantes y sus gobernantes por lo internacional. Una muestra de ello es que ustedes ejercieron la presidencia pro tempore de UNASUR hace muy pocos años, lo cual definitivamente los incorporó y los hizo visibles en Sudamérica. Deseo además felicitarlo por el esfuerzo que usted ha desplegado al entregarnos estos documentos gráficos escritos de lo que ha sido su presentación, de lo que es su programa, si acaso resulta electo secretario general adjunto. Mi delegación coincide con muchas de sus propuestas y con muchas de sus sugerencias, porque ellas son de sentido común, lo cual es complejo porque no siempre el sentido común es el más común de los sentidos. Dicho ello, sus propuestas, por ejemplo, sobre el rol del Consejo Permanente son ampliamente compartidas. El Consejo Permanente debe recuperar un rol o tener un rol distinto al que hoy día ejerce. De la misma manera, estimamos que las cumbres deben tener un rol de mayor perfilamiento para que los mandatos que de allí emanan sean implementados de manera más efectiva. Coincidimos también con su propuesta en la creación de la figura del Ombudsman. También coincidimos con el tema relacionado con el rol que debe tener la Junta de Auditores Externos. Pero en cambio, nos es más difícil aproximarnos al tema de las oficinas nacionales. Y ello porque la existencia de más de 25 de estas oficinas nos genera serias dudas sobre el valor y eficiencia de su desempeño, de su labor. Por ello quisiera, si usted es tan amable, en profundizar un poco más cuál es su perspectiva, su mirada para el rol de estas oficinas nacionales. Quisiera, y con esto concluyo, solicitarle que nos explique con mayor detalle cómo entiende usted el mecanismo de coordinadores regionales. Muchas gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, Ambassador Lira. Ambassador Karran, I offer the floor to you now.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those very kind remarks. I think you asked two questions, the first pertaining to national offices and the other one to the regional coordinators mechanism. With regard to national offices, what I was trying to explain in my presentation was that if one looks at the strategic plan that has been proposed by the Secretariat, the strategic plan seems to recommend that 1/3 of the national offices be cut, or 1/3 of the budget be cut. And my reaction was, and is, that there are too many member states for whom national offices are a very important part of their attachment to this organization. And rather than implement such a sweeping proposal that is contained in the management plan, what I'm recommending is that let us do a re-examination of the role of the national offices vis-a-vis the member states and the organization. Because I am not sure that in all the years that we have been debating the question of national offices and what to do with national offices and all these proposals that have been made over the years to cut funding and to close national offices, I am not sure that that has been done against a background where we have examined what exactly is the role and purpose and function of the national offices, the benefits to the member states, the benefits to the Secretariat in the evolving, in the evolution of the organization and with the hemispheric changes that are taking place. I don't believe that's a discussion that has taken place very fruitfully. So my recommendation is, before we cut, let us look at it again. And one of the things we should be careful about with national offices do not only benefit member states. National offices also benefit the Secretariat. National offices benefit the organization. I believe that there is much scope for national offices to play a part in developing country strategies, individual country strategies for the OAS. I believe that that's a potential that exists that we do not use, because we can use the representatives in those offices to liaise with the various departments here in the Secretariat to come up with country strategies that would be beneficial. That's one point. The second point, I believe that there was a study done some time ago by either the CARICOM group or some of the members of the CARICOM group that found that if you close national offices, you actually lose money in terms of, I think, payments that have to be made and so on. So this is something we need to look at. All I'm saying is, look, the management plan is saying close them, cut by 1/3. No, hold on. Let's take a step back and look at this again, because we might be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, like we say in English, okay? So I do not have a position. I'm saying let us look at it. We have to look at it before we know what the position is going to be. But the other point that is very important, you cannot put a price on political value. Political value, political capital, political benefits is something that's intangible. And national offices are of great political benefit to too many member states in this organization for us to look at the question only from a financial perspective. Like I said in my presentation, we have to look at it from the political as well as the financial angle simultaneously. Okay, so that is what I was trying to present, Ambassador. On the question of regional coordinators, as you know, I recently had the honor of chairing the meeting when the special session of the Permanent Council on the normalization of relations between the United States and Cuba. And those of us who were at that meeting would recall how difficult it was, how protracted the meeting was, and how difficult it was to arrive at consensus. But as difficult as it might have seemed, it would have been a lot more difficult had we not had extensive consultations using the regional coordinators mechanism. In fact, we ended up unintentionally using an expanded format of the regional coordinators mechanism. But it had a lot of value. And in my experience when I was chairman of the Permanent Council, the regional coordinators mechanism is a valuable tool. It's a valuable mechanism. It helps the council to iron out differences beforehand. It gives the chair and members of the council an idea of how the dialogue is going to progress. You can even sometimes arrive at a predetermined conclusion using that mechanism, which expedites the work of the council. It makes our work a lot smoother and more efficient. And I think this is really the goal. Now, I have seen the other side of the coin. I have seen Permanent Council chairpersons who do not use that mechanism at all. They do not consult regional coordinators. They come to take the floor at Permanent Council meetings, and I think that is really a lack of preparation. So this is what is behind my proposal, that we should try to formalize this arrangement. I am not completely wedded to the idea. I mean, we might find some other means of getting it done without having to go to a rule change, which might be something that's divisive. But it is a recommendation that I think that is well worth the paper it's written on, because I think it would certainly expedite the work of the council if we can find a way for the mechanism to be regularly used by chairmen of the Permanent Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran. I would like to offer the floor to the delegation of Brazil. You have the floor, sir.
Obrigado, senhora presidente. Antes de mais nada, eu gostaria de parabenizar o candidato pela completa apresentação que nos foi feita hoje. Eu também gostaria de expressar a minha satisfação com a abrangência e com a qualidade do material que nos foi distribuído hoje. Esse material demonstra, primeiro, que não é à toa que o candidato é o embaixador mais sênior desse conselho. Isso se nota perfeitamente nos comentários feitos aqui. Ou seja, o embaixador Karran é, sem dúvida, um homem que conhece em profundidade essa organização. Assim como mencionou o embaixador do Chile, eu também fiquei impressionado com muitas das propostas que foram apresentadas aqui. Algumas propostas ousadas, inclusive, que certamente gerarão ou poderão gerar alguma polêmica, e por isso mesmo me senti mais satisfeito por ver que o candidato não se limitou a defender pontos que eram apenas um consenso nessa organização. Muito ao contrário, ele pôs o dedo na ferida de muitas questões que não são facilmente analisadas ou negociadas, talvez, nessa organização. Por isso mesmo, eu quero parabenizar o embaixador Karran pela sua coragem, inclusive, ao tocar nesses pontos. E eu destacaria, das propostas mencionadas, eu destacaria algumas que me pareceram muito interessantes, a começar com o papel e a relação entre o secretário-geral adjunto e o secretário-geral. Diferentemente de alguns aqui, eu não entendo a posição do secretário-geral adjunto como estando no mesmo nível do secretário-geral, a despeito de os dois serem eleitos pelos Estados-membros. Eu entendo que o secretário-geral é a figura de maior responsabilidade nessa organização, em termos da estrutura da organização. Evidentemente, entendo, assim como o candidato já expressou, que cabe ao Conselho Permanente o papel preponderante nas decisões dessa organização. Mas, voltando, eu não vejo o secretário-geral e o secretário-geral adjunto no mesmo nível. Mas isso não significa também que o secretário adjunto seja um mero subordinado do secretário-geral e que deva cumprir as tarefas que lhe sejam repassadas pelo secretário-geral. Muito ao contrário, eu acho que cabe ao secretário adjunto cabem a ele funções específicas. E o candidato mencionou, inclusive, que os estados deveriam conversar ou discutir as funções que, de fato, queremos que o secretário adjunto assuma. O embaixador Karran mencionou a questão da administração. Acho que sim, acho que cabe fundamentalmente ao secretário-geral adjunto um papel fundamental nessa questão da administração da OEA. Mas fiquei muito satisfeito também ao ouvir do candidato que o seu papel como secretário adjunto, caso seja eleito, não seria um de confronto com o secretário-geral. Ao contrário, eles precisam trabalhar de maneira coordenada e não estão aqui para um competir com o outro em termos de funções ou em termos de maior notoriedade, digamos assim. Há outras questões que me parecem importantes, por exemplo, a ideia de um follow-up para as cúpulas, a questão do papel da Secretaria de Relações Exteriores, que de fato tem em suas funções, um dos objetivos é justamente a obtenção de recursos, e eu acho que essa função está um pouco perdida. A questão da independência do inspetor-geral, a criação do cargo de ombudsman, a atenção especial mencionada pelo candidato, a questão dos recursos humanos, isso me parece fundamental eu acho que isso está relegado a um segundo plano. Enfim, pontos bastante positivos, e um deles que eu gostaria, para encerrar, solicitar a sua avaliação. Antes de encerrar, esqueci de um ponto também: prestação de contas de viagens. Isso me parece fundamental, e não apenas uma listagem aqui dos países que foram visitados pelo secretário-geral ou secretário-geral adjunto. Acho que necessitamos de uma real prestação de contas dessas viagens. Mas, por fim, para encerrar, apenas um dos pontos mencionados pelo candidato que eu gostaria que ele elaborasse um pouco mais. Me pareceu uma ideia muito interessante, a dos diálogos subregionais. Eu gostaria que o candidato elaborasse um pouco mais sobre essa proposta, essa recomendação feita. Muito obrigado.
Thank you, Delegation of Brazil. Ambassador Karran, can I offer the floor to you to respond to the various questions and comments?
Yes, you can, Chair. Thank you, my dear colleague from Brazil. The leaders of CARICOM and SICA have held 3 summit meetings. And if you look at the communiques that come out of those 3 meetings, in each one of them, they have spoken about forging a closer relationship between our 2 subregions. In fact, the list of intentions and plans is very, very long. And they have also identified their representatives here to be the focal point for that interaction, to carry forward that agenda. There have been attempts made in the past, in the recent past, to have these sub-regional dialogues, but they have taken on a more kind of protocolary character, with not a great deal of substance being injected or being developed. So that is the genesis of my idea. But while limited to only CARICOM and SICA, we can have dialogues between CARICOM and ALADI, UNASUR and SICA. We can have, I believe that in the hemisphere we have today, with convergences of so many different integration mechanisms, the OAS, which is really the fulcrum. The OAS has universality of membership, and therefore we should be the point of convergence. And I believe that there is something to be gained if the sub-regional groups and member states wish for there to be that level of dialogue. I believe that it is not too difficult to arrive at agendas that would be of mutual interest, would be of common interest to these sub-regional groupings. And I believe that if we have progress in such dialogues, it would assist our own discourses here in terms of being able to reach consensus on issues, to define, refine the hemispheric agenda and matters of that nature. I think it's worth a try. So that was my idea behind making that proposal. And if I may just respond briefly to the comment you made about the relationship between the Secretary General and the Assistant Secretary General, I do not want there to be any misunderstanding about what I was trying to suggest in the nature of that relationship. So I just want to read to you from the brochure. By the very first sentence there, under the role and functions of the ASG, it says, "Let me state unequivocally that I recognize that the Secretary General is the official who is elected by member states to lead the OAS and to be the public persona of the organization." And later in that section, I say this: provided that the ASG's functions are exercised in such a way that the authority of the Secretary General is never undermined. In order to ensure stability at the head of the OAS, the ASG should not encroach upon the political authority and leadership of the organization by the SG. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran. I would now like to offer the floor to the Ambassador of St. Vincent and Grenadines. Ambassador Prince, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning to all. Ambassador Karran, I wish to start by thanking you for your presentation and congratulating you for a very comprehensive presentation, which also accurately captures the discourse that we've had here in the Council among member states. So I have for you 2 questions, or 1.5, if you want to consider it that way, and you would see why I said 1.5. You spoke, when you talked about the security pillar of the OAS, you mentioned migration as one of the issues that the OAS needs to confront. And you will recall that last year the OAS received high-profile representatives here, that is the presidents from Central American countries, to deal specifically with the subject of unaccompanied child migrants. And there are also several other elements of migration that many other member states of the OAS confront, and these are issues that are topical in the news for a long time now. So my question to you is, what role do you think the OAS can play in addressing the various elements of migration which confront us? The second question, which I refer to somewhat as a half question, it pertains to national offices, and Chile did raise this issue before. I was very pleased to read in your booklet that you consider national offices to be an underutilized asset of the organization. And I was also pleased by the passion with which you responded to the questions that were raised by Ambassador Lira. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is a very strong supporter of the retention of the national offices. We want for them to remain open, and I totally agree with you that they carry a significant political value, which cannot be reduced to dollars and cents. And we think it would be a mistake to confuse cost with value. So my question to you, and I think you alluded to it, but I would like to hear more concretely, how you think that the national offices can be a fully utilized asset, which can be more productive, more dynamic, and worthy of the conviction by all member states that they should remain open. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Prince, could you please repeat the question on the national offices?
Thank you. Okay, so as I said, the booklet indicated that the national offices are an underutilized asset. And St. Vincent and the Grenadines would not want to see the closure of the national offices either, and you have identified that they do carry significant political value. And we are emphasizing that it's important that we not confuse cost with value of the national offices. So in order to make them a fully utilized asset, because your statement is that they have been underutilized, in order to make them a fully utilized asset, how do you think What concretely do you propose to make them more dynamic, more productive, and worthy of the agreement of all member states that they do deserve to remain open and funded? Thank you.
Ambassador Karran, can I offer the floor to you?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Your first question related to migration, and I think that we all recognize that this is quite a hot topic. It is an issue that is very complicated. It is an issue that member states have different positions on. I think most of us here are both producers and recipients of migrants. And recently we have found not only the phenomena where migration is occurring, but basically why migration has occurred through the millennia for persons seeking to find a better existence. In the modern scenario, it is you can say that it's really driven by imbalances in labor markets. But as we all know, more recently in the Americas, we've seen migration being a factor that is impulsed by security considerations, not only by economic factors. And we've seen countries struggling to deal with this, both the sending states and the recipient states. We see countries trying to see how they can deal with this through their legal systems. And it is creating problems because, I mean, security is also involved in migration. Now, this is something I don't believe that, I believe we need to be very conscious that the elected officials of the OAS, they are servants of the member states. And I think in some instances it would be rather a little presumptuous to be proposing solutions when you have areas of great difference in opinions among member states. What I think the role of the OAS is, and of its elected officials, is to provide the avenue, to facilitate, to provide the means, to try to stimulate the dialogue, to provide the scenario for the dialogues to take place among member states, for them to make their decisions, for them to come to their conclusions, which it would then be the duty of the OAS to execute and to implement. So my in my presentation, what I said is that the OAS can play a larger role, I think, in trying to bring consensus among member states, in trying to encourage or in trying to facilitate consensus among member states. It is not that I thought that we ought to be, that the elected officials of the OAS ought to be necessarily making any specific proposals. This is a matter for member states to do. And in fact, I think that there is progress being made in that direction at the moment. Your second question regarding national offices, again, I think that this is something for member states to have a full, frank dialogue and to try a little harder to take the considerations of each other, of everyone, into account. And let us see if we can come up with a common solution. As regards the question of how to dynamize the national offices and make them you know, more effective and more useful, well, I think that, as I said, they could play a greater role in country strategies. They can, there's probably scope for them to liaise with the departments within the OAS at a more active, in a more active posture in order to implement the programs or to develop more programs with member states. I have to tell you that I have not gone around within the departments of the OAS. I have not asked for meetings with any heads of department or any high officials of the organization in order to flesh out these ideas. I have consulted only member states. So there is a lot more that I probably could have answered you if I had gone through such an exercise, but I haven't. But that's basically how I see the national offices. Thank you. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran. I would like to offer the floor now to the Ambassador of Trinidad and Tobago. Ambassador, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning to all. First of all, Madam Chair, let me say thank you very much for your leadership exercise thus far in this activity, which is so vital to the sustainability of the OAS going forward. And also, no less importantly, let me thank and congratulate Ambassador Karran for your presentation. I thought it was intellectually logical and temporally chronological. You went in the sequence, I think, that really covers the span of activities of the OAS. And also, let me thank you very much to afford us the opportunity to leave with your physical manifesto for future reference going forward as well. Ambassador, in looking at some of your presentation was very much filled with some long-living issues with some fairly pragmatic solutions for these issues. And I'm very much thrilled by the idea of an ombudsman. But do you wish to elaborate a bit more within the framework of the OAS, the reporting arrangements of such an office to the organization? And secondly, you appropriately identify the issue of enhanced organizational efficiency and effectiveness in lieu of the concerns of the member states not wishing to have increased quotas. But that also needs to be balanced. I think you identify that with the urgency of the mandate prioritization exercise coming out of the General Assemblies of the OAS in the past and present. Additionally, you brought up the issue of post-summit mandate reconciliation and the need for enhanced and increased specific funds, and you proposed to portal that through a consolidated sort of fundraising activities, I believe, through the Secretary of External Affairs. I'm wondering, how do you envision, if you're elected as the SU, to bring these two activities together, i.e. the mandate prioritization exercise coming out of the General Assemblies and the post-summit mandate reconciliation and the funding of these exercises going forward? Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And before I depart, let me wish you all successes in your elections, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Parsan. Ambassador Karran, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for your very kind remarks. The whole notion behind an ombudsman, I think, is the notion of independence. The ombudsman is supposed to be a kind of an arbiter, a kind of a referee, but one who has some kind of clout, whose authority, if it does not extend to actual enforcement, it certainly does. The weight of his decision is certainly so persuasive that it dare not be ignored by the entity that he is averse to. I have not researched how ombudsmen function in international organizations or in entities of such a nature. I'm only familiar with the function of ombudsman within national governments. So I do not have a ready answer as to exactly how the ombudsman would be executing those functions. But I'm pretty certain that it would be relatively easy to draw on the models that exist. probably the model taken from within national governments, or if there are ombudsmen in international organizations, we can take the model and adapt them to suit our circumstances, all the while ensuring that the OAS follows international best practices. I think that would be the solution to your concern. Regarding the question about the summit mandates, the mandate prioritization, and the raising of additional funds, these are all separate initiatives. They're not interconnected to each other. I was not making a proposal that in order to fund the summit mandates that we should raise additional funds per se, specifically to do that. The summit mandates exercise, my proposals in that area relate to the fact that there is some concern, genuine concern, I believe, that after a summit takes place, there is some kind of lack of coherence in the implementation of the mandates, that the summit secretariat could become a little overwhelmed with the mandates, and that leads to some kind of selectivity in how and what mandates are implemented and how they're implemented. So I have tabled proposals to cater for that, to strengthen the summit secretariat and for the joint summit working group to meet to avoid overlap and to streamline and to add more coherence to the implementation of summit mandates. The question of raising specific funds was not related to those clutch of proposals. The question of raising additional funds was to cure revenue gaps that exist within the organization. And what I'm saying there basically is that we probably have not been doing this as efficiently as we could. And there is a scope for us to do what we're doing now a little better. By doing that, we will earn more revenue. We will also add to the stature of the organization. But what's important, we will earn more revenue. And how we spend that revenue is to be decided by the member states, because there are member states who have concerns that if we get money from all kinds of sources that we don't know about as yet, that could lead to a distortion of the agenda of the organization. It could lead to money being given to us with conditionalities, so that only certain kinds of programs get implemented at the expense of others. So my proposal is we can raise money. I believe it's relatively easy to get more money into the organization. But how that money is to be spent, my proposal is let the member states decide when we get the money, what to do with it.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran. I recognize the delegation of Guatemala.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Mi delegación quisiera agradecer al embajador Karran por esta presentación, la cual es bastante clara y precisa. De hecho, algunas de las dudas que yo tenía se han venido ya respondiendo conforme usted ha venido también respondiendo a las preguntas de los diferentes Estados miembros. Mi pregunta número 1 tiene que ver con las funciones del secretario general adjunto, y veo que en su documento es bastante claro y es muy pertinente definir que esas funciones pueden ser administrativas o políticas. Sin embargo, en condiciones normales, creemos nosotros que esto es bastante cierto, pero yo no sé si, dado este esfuerzo en el cual nos hemos venido embarcando los Estados miembros con respecto a la visión estratégica y la reforma de la organización, lo que necesitamos es quizás un COO, un Chief Operational Officer, un administrador que se encargue de hacer realidad estas reformas de la organización. Mi pregunta es, ¿cómo ve usted el rol del secretario general adjunto vis a vis esta realidad de búsqueda de estas reformas? Porque ¿cree usted también si es necesario tener solamente esa responsabilidad administrativa en este periodo tan crítico para la organización, o debemos buscar enfocarnos también en la parte política como secretario general? Entonces, esa sería la primera pregunta. Y la segunda, que va de alguna manera vinculada a esta primera pregunta, tiene que ver con sus impresiones con respecto a la reelección. Conocemos ya en la presentación del candidato Almagro que él renuncia a un segundo periodo. Mi pregunta va en esa misma línea. ¿Cómo considera usted este asunto de la reelección? Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, delegation of Guatemala. Ambassador Karran, you have the floor.
Thank you for those two questions. On the question of the functions of the Assistant Secretary General, first of all, I don't believe that it is for me to say, because the Assistant Secretary General is a creature of the organization of the member states. And as we all know, the Charter leaves many things open for the Assistant Secretary General to do or not to do. So basically, it's what is allocated by the Secretary General. In my process of consultations with member states, I have had extensive discussions with them on this matter. In fact, in many cases, it was not I who raised the issue. It was the representatives of member states who had concerns about this question. From my discourses, the majority of member states would like the Assistant Secretary General to play a political role as well as an administrative role. All member states would like the Secretary General to have major responsibility, the Assistant Secretary General to have major responsibility for administration. A very large majority would also would like the Assistant Secretary General to have a political role. There are some member states, as I said in my presentation, who would not like the issue to be left to the Secretary General to decide what he wants to allocate to the Assistant Secretary General. That being the case, I would be prepared to operate at whatever level, in whatever role that member states decide. I'd be prepared to function in either capacity. The management plan, it speaks about a mutual accountability agreement. If we do end up adopting a mutual accountability agreement, and if member states wish to lay out what kind of role they want for the Assistant Secretary General, that could be a mechanism in which member states can state their preference. But ultimately, it is for member states to decide. Regarding the question of terms. I think that the primary consideration for any person running for office is the benefit of it would bring to the organization. That should be the primary consideration. At the end of my first term, I'm going to be 62 years of age. I do not believe that for someone to be Assistant Secretary General of this organization, you probably need a little more energy than a 62-year-old has. So that is the mindset with which I am going into this election. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran. I recognize the Ambassador of Mexico, Ambassador Abasa. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ambassador Bayney Karran, I will ask my question in Spanish since your knowledge of the language is very, very good, as I was able to testify recently while we were in Mexico. Quiero comenzar por felicitarlo por no solamente la presentación que hizo esta mañana, sino también por el excelente documento que nos ha distribuido, tanto en español como en inglés. Es, como dijo la embajadora Cilia Prince, una presentación y un documento muy amplio, muy comprensivo de los principales asuntos o issues, como se le dice en inglés, que confronta actualmente nuestra organización. Lo felicito pues por la organización del material y la articulación del discurso, que son muy claros y que revelan la profundidad con la cual usted está abordando esta candidatura. Al igual que lo dijo mi colega el embajador de Chile, la delegación de México también tiene muchas coincidencias con lo asentado en su documento y en su discurso. Quisiera solamente destacar algunas. Por ejemplo, en la página 4, donde dice: la OEA ha sido y es la piedra angular del proceso de integración en nuestro hemisferio. Es una institución que cuenta con una autoridad política, legal y moral incomparable. Totalmente de acuerdo. Desde luego que no podemos dejar sentada nuestra democracia duramente ganada como algo ya adquirido, y hay que seguir trabajando en ella como lo asienta aquí, y desde luego para ello la asistencia a los procesos electorales a través de las misiones de observación electoral son fundamentales. Coincidimos con usted en que entre las varias desigualdades que existen, la brecha educativa es la que afecta más negativamente el destino de cada persona, y por eso acompañamos con interés la propuesta que ha hecho Colombia sobre este asunto de la educación, que nos parece interesante y que debe ser analizada a profundidad. Desde luego que la seguridad pública debe ser abordada de forma integrada, y no podemos menos que felicitarnos al leer lo que señaló usted sobre derechos humanos, que, cito: si los Estados miembros abandonan el sistema interamericano de derechos humanos, sería el fin de la OEA. Lo que no quiere decir que debemos seguir perfeccionando el sistema interamericano de derechos humanos y revisando varias de sus prácticas, sobre todo en relación con su comunicación con los Estados miembros. Hay que fortalecer al multilateralismo y desde luego, la conclusión que saca de los pilares, que debido a la universalidad de su composición, la OEA debe seguir siendo en el futuro previsible el foro político principal del hemisferio y el vehículo principal para la promoción y defensa colectiva de la democracia, derechos humanos, desarrollo integral y seguridad multidimensional. Y es por ello que coincidimos también con varias de sus perspectivas, sobre todo, desde luego, la que se refiere al proceso de visión estratégica. Nos da gusto haber leído el señalamiento que hace usted sobre esta paradoja de la OEA en la que, por un lado, los Estados miembros insistimos en que la Secretaría General deba cumplir con sus funciones de manera eficaz, pero los mismos Estados miembros no estamos dispuestos a aumentar las cuotas para que sean responsabilidades que se cumplan. Esa paradoja hay que resolverla y hay que resolverla ya. El problema recurrente de atraso en los pagos de cuotas se tiene que resolver. Claro que requerimos una mejor administración y veo que usted dedica una buena parte de su documento y de su intervención a la administración. Los 10 puntos que señala nos parecen acertados. Y todo esto, señor embajador Karran, me lleva a un punto que considero esencial, y que ya abordaron varios de mis colegas, destacadamente el representante de Guatemala, y es el del papel y funciones del secretario general adjunto. Aquí tenemos un problema que necesitamos resolver. El artículo 115 de nuestra carta dice textualmente: el secretario general adjunto es el secretario del Consejo Permanente. Tiene carácter de funcionario consultivo del secretario general y actuará como delegado suyo en todo aquello que le encomendare. Durante la ausencia temporal o impedimento del secretario general desempeñará la función de éste. O sea que la carta le otorga un carácter consultivo y delegado a un funcionario que estamos eligiendo los Estados miembros. Aquí tenemos el caso de una doble elección, el secretario general y el secretario general adjunto. Mi abuelo constitucionalista, al hablar de la doble elección del Congreso y el presidente de los Estados Unidos, hablaba de la doble soberanía del sistema presidencial, diferente de la única del sistema parlamentario. Aquí tenemos toda proporción guardada un caso similar. Elegimos a 2 órganos, los Estados miembros, pero a uno la Carta lo hace de alguna manera, si estamos a la literalidad de este precepto, subordinado al otro, como un mero órgano consultivo. Yo no comparto este punto de vista. Comparto el punto de vista que señala usted de que el secretario general adjunto debe tener un papel político y administrativo significativo, no de competencia, desde luego, con el secretario general. Eso también ha quedado muy claro en su documento. Sabemos y no estamos cuestionando el rol del secretario general, pero sí un papel mucho más activo dentro de la organización, que no se limite a cuestiones protocolarias. De otra manera, no se entiende para qué estamos eligiendo a una persona, a un órgano, para, a fin de cuentas, darle exclusivamente ese tipo de atribuciones. Por lo cual, nosotros sí veríamos en la próxima administración un rol mucho más activo política y administrativamente del secretario general adjunto. Y en ese sentido me gustaría que ampliara usted sus comentarios, y en particular en relación con un tema que para la Delegación de México es de fundamental importancia. Señala usted en la página 9 sobre el papel multilateral de la OEA que, debido a la universalidad de su composición, la OEA debe seguir siendo en el futuro previsible. En la página 11, los Estados miembros también desean ver una mayor sinergia entre la OEA y las otras entidades del sistema interamericano, y en particular les gustaría que la OEA tenga una mejor relación con las instituciones financieras y de desarrollo internacionales. Esto nos parece clave, la integración del sistema interamericano, que ahorita está prácticamente desarticulado. La OEA, el BID, la OPS, la ICA. Se nos presenta una gran ocasión ahora con las cumbres, de que sean el cerebro que dicte las políticas generales a todos los elementos y se integre. Y yo creo que ahí el secretario general adjunto, como secretario ejecutivo de este conglomerado de órganos que deben estar funcionando con cierta regularidad, podría, entre otros, desempeñar un papel político activo e informar, desde luego, al Consejo Permanente. Me gustaría mucho sus comentarios sobre esta preocupación y, de nuevo, felicitaciones por su presentación y por su documento. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ambassador Rabassa. I'll offer the floor to Ambassador Karran to respond to your comments.
Ambassador, thank you very much for your, I should say, for your presentation. The question of the role and functions of the Assistant Secretary General is something that we have addressed a little earlier. And I think that the ideal relationship, and bearing in mind again always what would be in the interest of the organization and the hemisphere, what would be to the benefit of the organization and the hemisphere, would be for the Assistant Secretary General and the Assistant Secretary General and the Secretary General to complement each other's strengths and weaknesses. I think that balancing role would be the ideal, would be of the utmost benefit. And this, of course, would be in both political and administrative matters. I believe there is a clear understanding and belief among member states that the Secretary General ought to be relieved of much of the daily administrative burden in order for him to be able to execute his political duties in an unfettered manner. Therefore, the larger share of that work should fall to the Assistant Secretary General. That having been said, member states, many member states, most member states, almost all I think, would like the Assistant Secretary General to play a political role, and a substantial political role. And I think that this makes sense. Because let us say if the Secretary General is on travel somewhere very far, and a political crisis arises in some country nearby, and there is a need for the political actors in that country to speak to each other. That is something that the Assistant Secretary General can do. So there's a political role, and that's quite a simple example of how the Assistant Secretary General can assist the Secretary General in fulfilling the political functions and objectives of the organization. So I think that there is, from that example, there's little question about the desirability of the Assistant Secretary General performing such a role. That is the way I would prefer the office of Assistant Secretary General to function, to also have political responsibilities attached to it. But I would hasten to say I do not consider that that decision is mine. I consider that that decision is a decision for the member states, or at least for the member states to inform the Secretary General that this is what they would like to see. I am very confident that if I'm called upon to perform political functions, I would be able to do so in a capable manner. And I think that this would be ultimately to the benefit of the organization and of the incoming Secretary General as well. But I would just add one word of caution. The first word in the title Assistant Secretary General is assistant. It is not one should not take the initiative away from the Secretary General in the execution of the functions. I hope that this meets with we have a meeting of minds, Ambassador. I don't know if there were any other questions you wanted me to address, or if that was the only question.
la sinergia entre las partes del sistema. Y por cierto, ya que me da la oportunidad, lo único que no coincido es con lo que respondió usted de la edad de los 62 años. Yo tengo 66, entonces ya debería estarme retirado.
Yes, Ambassador, I think that there is a perception among many of the representatives here that the organizations within the Joint Summit Working Group, and particularly the organizations in the Inter-American system, are not as well coordinated as they can be, as they should be. I have not spoken to these other organizations, so I do not know what is the level of cooperation that exists, but I coincide in the perception, if it is a perception, or if it is a misperception, I don't know, that there is more that can be done. And I would be very pleased and very eager, if I happen to be elected, to play a role with the blessing of the Secretary General in trying to have more coordination, more coherence, and more activity among the organizations of the Inter-American system.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran. Esteemed colleagues, I have on my list 9 more requests for the floor. And I would just like to make a very cordial appeal to delegations in the interest of time, but also in order to start in time this afternoon, if we can try to be succinct in our questions, and that we can then finish around 1:15, so that we can start at 2:30 with our second presentation. And I would now like to offer the floor to the delegation of Suriname. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to you all. On behalf of the delegation of Suriname, I want to thank Ambassador Karran for his presentation. We would like to seek the views of Ambassador Karran with regard to the following. In light of the goals of the organization to intensify cooperation with multilateral, regional, and sub-regional organizations, what role do you envision for the ASG office in contributing to advance this type of convergence and complementarity? Thank you.
Ambassador Karran, you have the floor.
Thank you, Suriname. I think that recently, in the last few decades, we have seen a phenomenon in the hemisphere where countries at a sub-regional level are finding more and more reasons to come together in groupings to further their multilateral objectives. We've seen the formations of a number of very important groupings in the last few decades. And this is a development that has been welcomed by the Organization of American States, as you know. What distinguishes our organization from the others is that we have universality of membership. We're the only organization of which all the countries of the hemisphere are members. And so this right away gives us a point of convergence. This immediately makes us the go-to organization, if you like, if I can put it in such colloquial terms. This is the organization that is more of an umbrella than any other organization. And when you look at our agenda, we probably have the broadest agenda as well in the areas, in the 4 pillars in which so many issues can be accommodated, and indeed so many issues in which we are very active. So I believe that it is our duty to really try to play a role in coordinating the hemispheric agenda. We are the organization where the summits of the heads of all the countries meet and pronounce their mandates. So I think that when you look at some of the other organizations, they're very important organizations. They're very vital organizations. Otherwise, our member states would not be members of them. And they have their own specific agendas as well, very dynamic agendas. But I believe that our organization has an overarching kind of vision, an overarching kind of reach, an overarching kind of programmatic agenda. And I think that gives it the status and gives it the possibility of playing a sort of role of coherence and cooperation at that larger level, at that higher level. And I think that the Office of the Assistant Secretary General, which is what you asked, would be a cog in the wheel of the OAS. I don't see that there should be any specific responsibility attached to the office. It is a responsibility of the organization as a whole, but of course, whatever duties fall to the Office of the Assistant Secretary General ought to be executed in that area in order to achieve those objectives.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. The chair is pleased to recognize the Ambassador of Nicaragua. Ambassador Moncada, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora Presidenta. Señora Presidenta, la delegación de Nicaragua desea agradecer al embajador Karran por su exposición y por la distribución de su documento que contiene los planes, proyectos y programas que implementaría en caso de ser electo secretario general adjunto. Embajador Karran, en las normativas generales que regulan el funcionamiento de la OEA, se establece que el secretario general y el secretario general adjunto no solicitarán ni recibirán instrucciones de ningún gobierno ni de ninguna autoridad ajena a la organización, y también se abstendrán de actuar en forma alguna que sea incompatible con su condición de funcionarios internacionales responsables únicamente ante la organización. Le agradecería si usted hace sus comentarios sobre cuál sería su actitud y su posición ante una situación que tendiera a transgredir esta norma interna de funcionamiento. Muchas gracias, embajador Karran.
Ambassador Karran, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that question. Well, obviously, before my candidature was put forward by the government of Guyana, I looked at the rules, and as a candidate, and if I happen to be elected, I intend to obey all the rules of the organization. And obviously, therefore, if a foreign government or any other entity, as is stated in the rules, would try to importune my office in order to act in a manner that is in conflict with the rule, I would refuse to do so.
Okay, thank you very much for your reply, Ambassador Karran. Nicaragua, you're finished with your questions? Okay.
Have I answered this question?
I don't know. He has indicated that he has no further questions. So I am pleased to offer the floor to the Ambassador of Colombia, Ambassador González. Please take the floor.
Gracias, Presidenta, y celebro estos espacios que además de la presentación de plataformas, de ideas, nos permiten tener este diálogo profundo, serio, sobre nuestra organización. Comenzaría Colombia por agradecer la exposición, el cuidado, la seriedad contenida en los documentos que se han distribuido son bastante elocuentes y registramos con mucha satisfacción este punto, que nos deja una impresión de seriedad, de experiencia, de claridad. Incluso me llama mucho la atención, colegas, que sobre temas sin duda controversiales, el candidato se atreve a hablar con mucha claridad, aún a riesgo de generar distintas reacciones sobre el tema. Pero creo que esa manera de abordar de manera clara los distintos aspectos es muy saludable para la buena marcha de la organización. Nuestra reflexión, porque aquí se han tratado ya la mayoría de los temas, giraría sobre dos aspectos. El primero, político. Y realmente consideramos que en la OEA se requiere sin duda alguna, como en la mayoría de organizaciones importantes, liderazgo. Y liderazgo significa capacidad para conducir y capacidad para remontar, para superar los obstáculos, para vencer las resistencias al cambio. Pero también en lo político menciona usted además unos instrumentos bien interesantes, la capacidad de la organización para tener alertas tempranas, para prevenir conflictos, y subraya la importancia del diálogo y la comunicación con los actores en cada contexto para adentrarse en esa tarea. La primera pregunta sería entonces si se puede profundizar un poco esa percepción, esa visión de un instrumento preventivo, de alertas tempranas, de solución, anticiparse al conflicto, como lo demanda una buena política. El segundo aspecto ya es de orden económico y social. Coincidimos con usted en la importancia de la meta de la lucha contra la pobreza y la búsqueda de inclusión e igualdad, como aquí tantas veces hemos señalado. Y allí subraya usted igualmente a la educación como el camino más corto para superar esa brecha, como la palanca más robusta para lograr igualdad y el papel que puede tener la OEA en este tema. Desde luego siempre aparecen las preguntas del cómo, y ahí la capacidad del líder para encontrar los objetivos es muy importante. ¿Cómo? Segunda pregunta, ¿vería usted en el campo del cómo, de la instrumentalización, de la materialización de ese gran propósito, cómo lo vería? Y desde luego aquí tiene una gran importancia la sinergia, la interacción con las demás entidades del sistema interamericano y de los organismos multilaterales a nivel global. Pero desde luego lo más importante, liderazgo para superar las crisis, liderazgo para remontar los obstáculos. Gracias, presidente.
Thank you for your question, Ambassador González. I'm pleased to offer the floor to Ambassador Karran.
Thank you, Ambassador. Well, to your first question about preventing crises, I think that one of the key aspects of this is the need for dialogue. I assume that by crises, you mean crises that are internal to specific countries and not crises among countries. In either case, dialogue is the answer. I think that the organization, if it is not doing all it can already, ought to find ways to bring sectors together so that they can have the dialogue and have the kind of understanding, because what prevents crises and prevents conflicts is when you're able to pull contending parties back from the brink. I don't know if there is more that can be done to develop early warning systems, but that would be definitely one area, one way to go. The other thing would be to cultivate a presence and a level of trust and a level of understanding, a level of readiness for the OAS to be able to play the kind of role that is necessary in fostering dialogue, pulling parties back from the brink. I think this would go a long way in addressing the concern that you have identified. This question probably it needs a greater examination after the new leadership team is elected, about what are the systems that are there, how they could be improved, what the organization has been doing, what it can do better. I think that this is an active area, but I think that there is general agreement that we ought to be doing more, and I certainly think that the new leadership team should try to exert efforts to accomplish this. Like I said, I have not gone to the different departments of the organization to find out what has been happening, what they've been doing, and that sort of thing. But whenever the new team is elected, if I happen to be on that team, that would certainly be a high priority. The question of education, I know that Colombia had come with a very firm proposal. I think that that proposal has not been accepted quite in the way that Colombia has formulated it at the last education ministers meeting. That does not mean that the idea or the concept should die. I think that we all recognize how absolutely vital it is to be doing more work in the area of education. If we identify inequality as one of the biggest scourges in the hemisphere right now, obviously, if that's the diagnosis, then the prescription and the cure is education. That's the only thing. So certainly, I think that the proposal that has been formulated by Colombia could probably be re-examined in light of comments that were made at the education ministers meeting, so that we can reformulate a proposal that would be acceptable to member states. But I certainly agree that in the area of education, we need to be doing more in terms of coordinating national policies at the regional level in order to improve the delivery of education, particularly to the disadvantaged sectors in our societies.
We appreciate the elaboration of your answers to those questions, Ambassador Karran. I'm pleased to offer the floor to the Ambassador of Dominica, Ambassador Charles. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I would like to join others in congratulating Ambassador Karran on an excellent and comprehensive presentation. I think we should also congratulate him on committing some of his recommendations to paper, because as Ambassador Hassan has suggested, once those are committed to paper, it is always possible to go back and to find out whether, in fact, you have been faithful to some of the things that you have committed to. Some of the recommendations made by Ambassador Karran we have heard of before, but it is nice that he has committed to them and has made some new proposals. I like very much the idea of a regional dialogue. Of course, we've heard before of the importance of maintaining the integrity of the national offices. And he has made several recommendations. The initiative on the observers, the special observers initiative, all of those I think are rather interesting. The question really has to do with the ability, and I think we're going back to what I think is the main issue at this meeting, the ability of the ASG to implement those ideas. At the same time, we are accepting that the real responsibility for implementing them does not reside with the ASG. So we first, I think, need to get a sense as to some of those strategies that Ambassador Karran proposes to use in order to have those innovative ideas considered rather than shunted to the side. That's number one. What are some of those things that you think would you need to do in order to have those considered? The second one remains on that same issue and asks whether there is not an opportunity to elaborate on the interpretation that we have given to the term secretary to the council up to now. The ASG is the secretary to the Permanent Council. And I think the Charter must have had an intention other than preparing for and reporting on the meetings of the Council. For me, there is an opportunity for us to help with a new interpretation, because I suspect that the secretary to the Council has to bear the opinions of the Council. The secretary to the Council has to be the porte-parole of the Council and to advocate for those views in instances where the Council is not, either through its representatives, is not necessarily present. In other words, in the interaction with the SG, I suspect there is an opportunity to interpret the role of the secretary to the Council in a stronger term. And some of us have used the term political. I suspect that that political thing may already be built in. So I would like to get your views on the possibility that the powers that we seek for the SG have already been granted by the Charter. Okay, so Madam Chair, just two issues: the capacity, the strategies for advocating for prioritizing some of those interesting issues that you have proposed, and whether there is a likelihood that we could give a new interpretation to the term mandated by the Charter, which is that the Assistant Secretary General is the secretary of the, and whether that does not imply a certain amount of power to represent the Council in its interactions with the SG and with others. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador Charles. Ambassador Karran, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have gone into an excursion into a very gray area. I am not certain that the charter is clear. I'm not as certain as you are, Ambassador, that the charter is unequivocal, that the ASG also has built in to what is formulated in the charter a political role. I would defer to your interpretation, but as you know, I happen to be a lawyer by training, so I tend to take a more legalistic approach and a less pragmatic approach in some instances. I would defer to your interpretation, but I'm not too certain that that's the way I read it. So if we come to the question of the Secretary to the Council and what the role of the ASG should be in carrying out those functions, again, I think we can find interpretations and meanings in other instances, in other organizations. There would be literature on the subject, and we can easily define, we can easily find what is the appropriate definition. What I would say is, if the members of the council feel that, and I said this earlier, if members of the council feel that we need to have a more ample definition, a clearer definition, if we need to be more specific about the precise nature of the functions of the Assistant Secretary General, we can do so. We can do so in the accountability, in the agreement. We can change the rules. We can easily do that. But I am not certain that what exists now in the rules are definite enough for all of the interpretations that all member states want to put onto it. Regarding your question about how I propose to implement, well, if I happen to be elected, the first thing I would do is, on day one, I would have a meeting with the Secretary General. And I would say to the Secretary General, well, sir, these are the, or madam, we don't know yet, these are the plans that I laid out when I was doing my campaign. This is what I promised the Permanent Council I was going to do. So I need your help to get them done. I need your cooperation to get them done, and please let me know how I can cooperate with you to get your plans put into place. We would then have a common program that we would construct, I would imagine, with the blessings of member states. And that's the way we would proceed. If there is something I feel strongly about in my program that the Secretary General does not want to take on board, well, we will have a discussion, and as the way it should be, we would have a discussion and see what we need to adjust and to readjust. I hope I've answered your question, Ambassador.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran. I would like to offer the floor now to the interim representative of Canada.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ambassador Karran, for your presentation, which we certainly are extremely impressed with. It's comprehensive and specific. I would also like to congratulate you on what I see as the results of the careful consultations that you undertook over the past months. It's very clear from these documents that you spoke with a lot of member states, you listened to a lot of ideas, and you integrated them in very, very balanced ways in the documents that you've presented. And I would suggest that that's a very strong job interview for the position that you've put yourself forward for, and I would congratulate you for that, and I'm very grateful for these documents. The approach that you've presented us with, and I should say I have two very quick questions. It's a prudent approach. It highlights a lot of the things that are important to Canada. Finalizing the rationalization of mandates and implementing the Management Modernization Initiative. It provides some very good answers to some difficult questions. It talks about what you will do and how you will do it, and that sits very well with us. But some of the hardest questions are not about what you will do, but how you will face things that you will not or cannot do. And I would like to know a little bit more from you if I could, and my question is as follows. What do you see as the areas of greatest OAS value added, and where should this organization do less? How do we make those choices? If we're going to focus and rationalize, what are the things that may fall outside of our scope, and how do we make those choices? My second question is, the best of plans need resources to carry them forward, and whoever becomes the new leadership of the organization will face a very difficult first few weeks. I don't think it's any surprise to anyone that the organization is facing a financial challenge of short and long term. And I would like to know, my second question is, what advice would you give to the new Secretary General as regards how this crisis should be faced in both the short and the long term? And more importantly, how do you see the Office of Assistant Secretary General supporting the Secretary General in addressing the financial status of the organization? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your very concise questions. Ambassador Karran, I offer the floor to you now.
Thank you, Canada. The question of what do we do less? Well, the organization has 4 pillars. And we are always talking about balance among the pillars. So from that point of view, I do not see how we can talk about doing less. All the dialogues that we've had is about doing more in all areas. And it would hardly be within the purview of one of the public servants in the organization to say, well, this is what I think that we should do less of or more of. That remit lies with the member states. So I'm not sure that I should go out on a limb there on that one. I think the key to that question really lies in the exercise of the prioritization of mandates, because that is what is going to, if we manage to accomplish it successfully, and we've made a great start at this round, I think that that is really going to make a lot of difficult issues, if not resolve themselves, at least make them a little easier to deal with. There is no pillar that I would like to see the organization do less in. But I would hazard, at the risk of probably alienating some support, that if we are to stick a pin in it, I think that the majority of member states, the pillar that more member states are more concerned about is how much we're doing in integral development. I think that would be a fair assessment. If we are to do it numerically, I think that would be a fair assessment. However, I don't wish to advocate that we do integral development at the expense of any other pillar. And that really lies behind my proposal for raising revenue. Because I do not want to be presumptuous to say that when we raise revenue, it must go into the integral development pillar, because I think that's the decision that must be made by member states. But I think that that's the natural place for it to go. And if you consider it, donors are not going to really give you money to repair your building. They're not going to give you money for your capital needs. I mean, you know, people would more easily, I expect, give you money to run programs that would benefit your societies. So that is what lies behind the resource mobilization proposal. But I think that that's ultimately to be decided by member states. As I said, particularly bearing in mind that member states have concerns about how those funds are applied. I think that the question of the budget, the financial situation in the organization, I think that at the end of the day, member states have to decide what is the level of financial commitment they wish to make to the organization. I think we need to bear in mind that the Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General are not going to have all of the solutions. They are not going to be able to solve the financial issues in the organization by themselves. That lies in the question of availability of funds. And that is something that lies, again, within the purview of member states. The Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General cannot manage the entity in the way it ought to be managed without the full support of the member states. And this is especially true, I think, when we're talking about the level of financing that's available to the organization at any given time. I think that member states need to have a dialogue and a discussion about the question of financing, about the question of quotas, about the question of quota payments. I mean, to use a colloquial expression, you get what you pay for, you know. And I think that that the Assistant Secretary General, the Secretary General, at the end of the day, they will have to manage as best they can. They're going to be put in very difficult situations. And you asked, what would I do? What would I advise? Well, I will have to see what situation is there, and I would certainly try to give my best advice in terms of, you know, managing what we have in the most appropriate manner, taking into account the least amount of discomfort to the organization and the least amount of damage to projects, programs, and so on, and the administration of the entity. That is what I think my role is to do with the Secretary General. But beyond that, I think that that the rest lies within the purview of member states. You asked a lot of questions. I hope I've captured them all.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran. The delegation of Jamaica is recognized. Ambassador Fasciani, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank Ambassador Karran for his excellent presentation and for the thought-provoking written material, and also for his clear and thoughtful responses to the questions that have been posed. I have two questions. First of all, I note, Ambassador Karran, that you are one of the founders of the Guyana Legal Aid Clinic, and you are the chair of the you were the chair of the Permanent Council at the time when the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights was up for review. So in light of that, my first question is, which measures concerning reform of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights do you support, and which ones do you oppose? And for my second question, you mentioned the perception, Ambassador, that some states are underrepresented within the OAS Secretariat. And you also note this on page 18 of one of your documents. Point 6, implement a balance in the national and sub-regional origins of employees. So my question is, how would you work to bring about change in this area, to bring about balance within representation at the secretariat level? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Fassiani. Ambassador Karran, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador, the question of the representation, national origin representation of members of staff of the Secretariat, this is something, as I've indicated, is of concern to many member states. When I prepared my proposals, I did not have in mind any hard and fast approach, just the intention of trying to deal with the issue, because as I indicated, it is not only of concern to member states, but in some instances I do detect that it actually affects their attitude to the organization. It is something that they would like dealt with. Some member states feel pretty strongly about it, and therefore, as a new administration who is serving the member states, I think that we ought to do something about that. This brochure was prepared before I had the opportunity to listen to His Excellency candidate Almagro when he made his presentation. But I do recall that in his presentation, he indicated that he would be prepared to implement an affirmative action kind of program to deal with this issue. So if the Secretary General has an affirmative action program, I suppose that the Assistant Secretary General would have to take that on board in whatever he wants to, in whatever proposals he is going to be formulating. So that is something that we will have to look at in that light. I would like to, on the question of reform of the legal aid, the human rights system, Ambassador, this is a question that has to be determined by member states. I have to execute what member states decide. I think that one has to, as a candidate, one has to make a very clear distinction between what are the areas that lie within the remit of member states and what are the areas that, that one would have to implement if one is elected. So the debate, as you know, is very rigorous. There have been many high-level meetings. There have been many proposals. There are various issues in contention. But I am observing very keenly how that debate unfolds at the moment. We have in Guyana our own national process that is examining the issues. That process is not yet complete, and so I would be very happy to get back to you on that on a subsequent occasion.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran. I would now like to offer the floor to the Ambassador of Costa Rica, Ambassador Barahona. The floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta, y un saludo a todos los presentes y a todas las presentes. Embajador Karran, señor candidato, yo quisiera primero, en nombre de la delegación de Costa Rica, agradecerle a usted y a su gobierno por decidirse a engalanar este proceso electivo como decano de este consejo, que usted en su programa ha catalogado además como la mejor colección de diplomáticos que este hemisferio puede reunir. Cierro la cita y le agradezco el cumplido. La tarea que usted ha hecho, transparentando su candidatura mediante una propuesta concreta, por escrito además, que lo compromete a resultar electo, como bien dijo mi colega Trinidad y Tobago y mi compañero aquí de Dominica, que lo compromete, desde luego, caso de resultar electo, secunda este esfuerzo que estamos haciendo en estas comparecencias, del que usted como embajador además ha sido parte. Pues al comparecer hoy ante este colegiado, profundiza usted precisamente sobre esos compromisos de manera muy congruente. Pues créame que estuve muy atento a pescarlo, a agarrarlo en algún descuido y me ha dejado usted con las ganas. Y esa congruencia es sana, es muy sana. Habremos de coincidir y es sin duda un buen augurio de esos vientos frescos de cambio que usted percibe y quiere aprovechar y según dice incluso en la portada de su programa, son un poco su faro de guía y entiendo la motivación por la que ha asumido este encargo. Nos demuestra usted, embajador Karran, que no solo es usted un gran locutor, sino también un gran interlocutor. Y eso lo digo por la presencia suya en su comparecencia inicial unilateral y ahora en este intercambio. Y ello porque le reconozco, a no dudarlo, la valentía, además de pasarse usted voluntariamente de este lado del paredón a ese. Es esta silla que usted ha ocupado mucho tiempo, mucho más cómoda que esa otra que usted está hoy ensayando, pero pretendiendo ocupar permanentemente. Lo cual yo en lo personal y como amigo no me explico mucho, pero tengo que reconocerle la valentía. Y eso lo digo desde luego con honesto respeto y sincero aprecio. Pero dicho esto, nos interesa profundizar en tres preguntas. Y quiero aclararle partiendo de lo específico y hacia lo general, y he tenido que ir rearmando un poco eso para procurar que realmente en este intercambio, en donde lo más importante es escucharlo a usted, no caer en repitencia de las sanas preguntas e inteligentes que ya han hecho mis colegas que me han precedido en el uso de la palabra. Entonces, la primera pregunta específicamente va en este sentido. Usted plantea en su propuesta, que como notará, correspondimos con una lectura atenta, desde luego, y como mínima consideración que le debemos a ese esfuerzo que usted ha hecho. Usted plantea informar a la CAP e incluso al Consejo Permanente de todos sus viajes como secretario adjunto, en caso de ser electo. E incluso motivar al secretario general, pues no puede ser usted más que eso, que motivarlo, que procurar que lo secunde en ese ejemplo. Pero me quedaba un poco a mí la pregunta al hacer la lectura, ¿qué hay del resto de secretarías? Y también podría preguntar del resto de funcionarios. Pero sobre todo a nivel de las secretarías técnicas, ¿no considera usted que también deberían informar periódicamente, no solo en ánimo de transparencia, sino también de coordinación a lo interno de la OEA? Y en segundo término le agrego esta pregunta que es muy puntual: si estaría usted de acuerdo en transferir a la organización todas las millas que las aerolíneas le acrediten por resultancia de sus viajes en función, desde luego, para que con ellas la OEA pueda adquirir gratuitamente viajes futuros y con ello ahorrar, así como a la vez promover esa política para el caso de todos los funcionarios que viajen con cargo a la organización, tal como por ejemplo sucede en el caso de mi gobierno, que con toda razón y como mensaje de austeridad y administración congruente de lo público, nos exige a los funcionarios públicos, en cuenta a los diplomáticos, acreditarle las millas a la institución para la que laboramos y financia nuestros viajes. Ese es un ejemplo que, más allá del monto específico de ahorro que puede implicar, creo que podría dar un mensaje de absoluta congruencia y, como decimos en Costa Rica, a pellizcos se mata un elefante. Así que posiblemente podamos nosotros, con estos pequeños gestos, algunos de los cuales ya mi delegación ha iniciado, como todos sabrán, pues nos parece que podemos empezar a ir en la buena marcha y con ello sí tener también autoridad moral para ir a sugerir, para ir a solicitar aumentos de cuotas y pagos, digamos, que todavía se están debiendo a esta organización por parte de algunos estados. Y más en general, y aquí viene la segunda pregunta, y por eso decía que la otra era muy específica, porque atiende a un punto presupuestal, pero quisiera yo aterrizar en el cómo, en señalamientos puntuales, y no solo que nos quedemos un poco en la aproximación general. porque al final todos estamos de acuerdo un poco en el qué, embajador Karran, pero cual palomitas de maíz, cuando empezamos a hablar del cómo, empiezan a saltar fuera de la olla con posiciones en la mayoría de las veces muy válidas. Entonces quizá la discusión, y eso es un poco lo que he notado en la comparecencia del canciller Almagro y hoy también, y es mi voluntad que tratemos de aterrizar un poco más en el cómo, es decir, porque estamos muy claros cuando usted habla de fortalecer el sistema interamericano de derechos humanos, para poner un ejemplo que es quizá el más evidente, el asunto es, como dicen, el diablo se esconde en los detalles y en cómo vamos a hacer eso, qué entendemos por fortalecimiento, igual cuando hablamos de democracia, cuando hablamos de afrontar la pobreza, etcétera. Porque en el cómo está la pregunta ideológica, por lo general. Pero entonces, ¿en qué consiste? Aquí viene la segunda pregunta. ¿En qué consiste el servicio que podría prestarle a la OEA al hemisferio en materia de fortalecimiento democrático y más puntualmente con miras a la promoción y aseguramiento del pluralismo político, la libertad de expresión, la división de poderes y la probidad pública? E insisto, lo más importante, ¿cómo se ocuparía usted de ello como secretario adjunto para que ese servicio se concrete? Entonces termino nada más procurando que ese rol que usted se autoimpone, un poco de complemento del secretario general titular, lo avisora usted. Esta es una pregunta repitente, es decir, en la que caigo desde luego en repitencia, pero me ha quedado la duda. Digamos, si el concepto suyo para un secretario general adjunto es de simple acompañante o simple ejecutor de las iniciativas del secretario titular, o como colíder con iniciativa y peso autónomo, sobre lo cual también le pediría un poco ampliar en relación a cómo entenderemos nosotros, digamos, esa complementariedad entre el titular y el adjunto. Pues si bien es cierto, eso es algo en lo que los estados podemos eventualmente decidir, alimentar y ir en la ruta de reformas para aclarar un poco ese panorama en el que la carta es muy somera, ciertamente nos parece importante, sobre todo partiendo de su experiencia, cómo lo avisora usted de cara a futuro. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta, por la condescendencia, pero no quería dejarla pasar la oportunidad sin preguntarle al decano de este foro con absoluta puntualidad sobre estos temas que a mi delegación interesan. Adelante, señor Karran, y muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ambassador Barahona. Ambassador Karran, do you have a record of all the questions of Ambassador Barahona?
I think so.
Okay, so go ahead, please.
Ambassador, I would like to thank you very much for your very kind remarks. I would like to begin by observing that when I spoke to you yesterday, you told me you had one question. You told me you'll be asking a question. It's a good thing that it's only one night elapsed since then to now. The question of travel, you asked whether you indicated that in the brochure I had said that I would recommend to the Secretary General that his office also follows the example of declaring their travel to CAP, and why this should not be extended to the entire Secretariat. I have actually said so in the brochure, that this example should be followed by the entire Secretariat. It's there in the brochure. Frequent flyer miles. I heard somewhere that the system that exists at the moment is for employees at the OAS. Their frequent flyer miles are given to the organization. So I was under the impression that that already occurs. If it doesn't, I'd be very happy to donate my miles to the organization, without question. The question of how to strengthen democracy. I think, Ambassador, that one strengthens democracy by strengthening the institutions of democracy.
one strengthens democratic institutionality. My country, we can only strengthen democracy if we already have electoral democracy. And to make democracy stronger, we have to strengthen the court system, we have to strengthen the parliamentary system, we have to strengthen the basic institutions of democracy and make them work. I believe that the OAS already does a great deal of work in that area, and if I happen to be elected, this is something that I would look at along with the incoming Secretary General. If it is candidate Almagro who becomes the new Secretary General, I believe he has also declared that is what he intends to do in terms of strengthening democracy. So this is something that if we are both elected, we already are of the same mind. We will look at it to see what the organization is doing, what else we can do better, how we can get more external resources, how we can strengthen our internal systems, and how we can better relate to member states in order to accomplish this. But we need to recognize, Ambassador, that at the end of the day, the OAS cannot do for a member state what a member state does not want the OAS to do for it. That's the bottom line. In my country, we have had cooperation programs run by external agencies. Some of them we have been in agreement with. Some of them we have not been in agreement with, because we don't agree that this is the way it should be done. So this is the position that the OAS is going to find itself in from time to time. But to answer your question, we would certainly be very interested I would certainly be very interested in strengthening democracy in the hemisphere. I think it's key. Whether the Assistant Secretary General is autonomous, whether he's a co-leader, I think that we've already gone over this question in some respects. And what I would say to you in answer to the question you asked is that, in my view, the Assistant Secretary General is a co-leader, but not one with separate authority. I hope that answers your question.
Sorry. Thank you, Ambassador Karran. I would like to offer the floor now to the Ambassador of Peru. Go ahead, please.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. También quisiera, a nombre de mi delegación, enviarle un saludo al candidato Karran, al embajador Karran, agradecerle su completa exposición, estructurada exposición además, con estos documentos que nos alcanza. Y el énfasis de mi intervención para hacer las consultas correspondientes está en el ámbito de los pilares de democracia y derechos humanos. Nosotros quisiéramos saber la visión sobre democracia que tiene el embajador en el ámbito de la región. La OEA en los últimos tiempos viene a estar muy criticada en su papel regional. Crítica fundada o infundada, dependiendo de las perspectivas que se quieran plantear, pero que ha generado lo que muchos llamamos acá la crisis de la OEA, que también está en otros ámbitos como el administrativo. Pero hay que rescatar en realidad el papel que tiene la organización en muchos aspectos. En el aspecto de democracia, evidentemente el consenso que tenemos hoy día de hoy en América está relacionado a democracias que están sustentadas en el voto popular. Tenemos el día de hoy, por una serie de influencias que se ha ejercido a partir de esta organización, organismos electorales muy sólidos que no generan en lo global, digamos, cuestionamientos al origen de la democracia. Y de esta perspectiva, el papel que ha tenido la OEA ha sido muy importante. Además, las misiones de observación electoral que se realizan hasta el día de hoy con éxito, que marcan pautas y, por supuesto, también recomendaciones a los estados para mejorar los sistemas electorales. Tenemos todavía debates, discusiones internas a partir de escenarios que tenemos en América relacionados a la verificación del contenido de las democracias, de cómo esta legitimidad de ejercicio de la democracia también tiene que ser de alguna manera valorada y no solamente la legitimidad de origen. De esta perspectiva, evidentemente, respetamos todos, y el Perú en primer lugar también, el principio de autonomía de cada uno de los estados, de no intervención, y quisiéramos saber su perspectiva sobre el particular. Y lo segundo, señora Presidenta, quisiéramos solicitar por su intermedio que el embajador Karran pueda decirnos respecto al pilar de derechos humanos algunos aspectos que están contenidos en el documento que nos ha presentado y que me parecen de la mayor importancia. Él ha dicho que, y lo voy a leer, ningún sector ganaría nada si los Estados miembros pierden la confianza en el sistema. Se está refiriendo al sistema interamericano de derechos humanos. Si los Estados miembros abandonan el sistema interamericano de derechos humanos, sería el fin de la OEA. La visión que tiene el candidato sobre el aspecto de derechos humanos es central, por lo que estamos viendo de acuerdo a su filosofía, aspecto que compartimos, por supuesto. Y en esta perspectiva que usted ha señalado al responder la pregunta del representante de Jamaica en relación a cuál va a ser el papel que de alguna manera usted puede desempeñar en esta materia, debido a estas divergencias y debido a esta falta de comprensión, y quiero ser muy claro en esto, esta falta de comprensión que muchas veces se tiene desde las situaciones políticas de los estados respecto al propio sistema. Esta posición de controversia, esta posición en donde no tenemos una cooperación para poder mejorar los estándares en los países, para poder avanzar en positivo, una relación en positivo que estamos reclamando los estados al sistema. Esto se ha venido hablando en el proceso de reflexión que ha habido hace los últimos 3 años, pero creo que el resultado no ha sido lo más auspicioso que se podría tener en cuenta. Ahora tenemos un proceso de elección de miembros de la Corte y la Comisión. Seguramente esto también será materia de debates internos para ver justamente lo que se viene. Y yo quisiera, señora Presidenta, que nos pueda dar su visión en relación a este tema también, de cómo, por ejemplo, podemos avanzar en una mejor comprensión en esta tarea. Y, por supuesto, uno de los temas que se han hablado mucho, que es el aspecto de universalización de los derechos humanos. Gracias.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Karran, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador, for your questions and comments. Ambassador, as you have pointed out, there is no doubt that there is a great deal of disappointment on the part of many member states regarding the functioning of the inter-American human rights system. There's no doubt that there is a great deal of disapproval on the part of many member states about the functioning of that system. There's a great deal of dissatisfaction, and this is what has led to the situation that we are in, where, as I've indicated, it would be really very damaging for member states to leave the human rights system. I am not sure that any one of us has all the answers. Certainly I don't. But what I would propose, and I believe I've mentioned that in my brochure, that I think that the Secretary General, the incoming Secretary General, could try to formulate proposals that would ease the friction between member states and the human rights system. What those proposals should be, I do not have them in my head at the moment. I think this is an exercise that has to be of a consultative nature between the Secretary General and the member states on the one hand, and the human rights system on the other. But I think that there is the possibility of some progress through dialogue. Because I think that there is a need for the concerns of member states to be taken on board by the system, and I think that there is certainly some benefit that can accrue if the protagonists were to have some kind of a meeting of the minds. So that would be a first step. And from there, we can develop how we can try to resolve some of the thorniest issues. We may not be able to resolve them all, but we can certainly try to decrease the tension and see some of the areas in which we can make progress. You asked about universality. I think that that is something that is under national consideration, certainly in the case of my country, and I would imagine in the case of many other countries. And this is a sovereign decision that member states will have to take at the appropriate time. And I think that member states' views, their eventual opinions on that is going to be determined by or it can be facilitated precisely by the kind of dialogue that I've been suggesting. Thank you. Was there another question, Ambassador?
Sí, el aspecto democrático, señor embajador.
Can you?
Sí, cómo no.
Can you please repeat the question that you had on democracy, Ambassador?
Sí, quería conocer la perspectiva o la visión sobre el aspecto democrático, el pilar de democracia que el candidato tiene en relación a cómo mantenemos los aspectos de observación electoral, el ámbito vinculado al perfeccionamiento de sistemas electorales, de qué manera tenemos también una preocupación sobre los aspectos de legitimidad de ejercicio democrático en la región.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador. I'm sorry I missed that in your earlier intervention. Ambassador, I think it is by now a cliche in this organization that our electoral observation activities is one of the areas of greatest success in the organization. And obviously, member states place a very high value on this activity because they would not be requesting observation missions to participate if this were not the case. So I think that there is a demand on the part of member states, and since there is a demand, the organization ought to try to meet that demand. We therefore ought to try to be more proactive and more effective, try to mount larger missions, better missions, longer missions, in order that we meet the needs of member states, because really, as we all know, democracy and strengthening democracy, particularly electoral democracy, is fundamental to the other pillars. So this is the way I think that we should proceed with the electoral observation missions.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran. We have our last two requests for the floor. So, well, three more. Ambassador Beale, can I offer the floor to you now?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would very much like to congratulate Ambassador Karran for a fine presentation. I only have one point of disagreement with his comments, which is related to the energy level and age. You said you will be 62 in 5 years. I am 68 today, and I don't feel one more day older than 50. A quick comment on this issue of the national offices. There's a simple solution, as far as I'm concerned, may not be total, but I think it would go a long way, is simply to put the right kind of person to lead it. He has to have initiative and commitment and some ideas, etc. If you do that, a lot of these problems will be solved. I do have one question which relates to the role, which I think is important for us, the future of the youth in our region, because I certainly think that that's where the focus should be. So can you give us a few ideas about perhaps your vision on that, or the role of how we can interact with the youth? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bill, and on behalf of the Permanent Council, let me extend warmest congratulations on your 68th birthday. It's not to the... Ambassador Karran, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me join the chair in wishing you many happy returns and a very happy day today. I'm sorry that today on your birthday, this is what you have to be subjected to, but I'm sure that you'll make the most of the rest of the day. Ambassador, I want to thank you for posing that question, because it is something that is very near and dear to my heart. I believe that to the extent that the organization does not embrace youth, to the extent that the organization alienates itself from youth, it is to that extent that we are moving away from the future. It is to that extent that we're standing still and not making ourselves relevant to the future. And I think that there are probably many ways in which we can seek to engage the youth. I have not dealt with that in my brochure, but it's certainly not far from my mind. I think that first of all, there are probably areas in which we can interact through social media. We can expand the range of social media, which is where you find youth. I believe it's probably about time that we have an OAS app, for example, and other platforms, social media platforms that young people nowadays interact with. We have to get our messages that are relevant to youth resonating among them, and we have to find ways of getting there. It's about communication. It's about mobilizing involvement. I do have quite a few ideas on how to proceed in that direction. And I think that if I happen to be elected, I would certainly have quite a few initiatives in that area. But I take your point. It is a very important area, and it is something that we need to really focus a lot on if we are not already doing so.
I recognize the delegation of the United States of America.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Let me add my voice to that of all our colleagues here today to congratulate Ambassador Karran for an extremely thorough presentation, the prepared materials, the formal presentation this morning, the dialogue that we are undergoing now. I congratulate you, sir, on your thoughtfulness, on your thoroughness, and indeed on your stamina. I will be brief. I only have 8 questions. Oh, that's right. Sorry, 7 of them at least have already been discussed by others. So I only have 1 question, in fact, because we've already heard about relations between the Assistant Secretary General and the Secretary General, between the Secretariat and the member states, the relations with other international organizations, the approach to the pillars, the approach to the Permanent Council, finances, quotas, strategic vision, et cetera, et cetera. I would like to ask a question, if I may, briefly, about the human element in all of this, if I may, and your role within the organization should you be elected. There are issues, as you've also noted in your prepared materials and briefly referenced today, there are issues relating to staff morale within the superb workforce that is already employed by the organization. in addition to strengthening the Office of the Inspector General and establishing an ombudsman as you propose, how would you best use your advisory role to improve staff morale, to empower existing management structures and positions, and to otherwise advocate for best management practices within the organization moving forward? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, delegation of the U.S., Ambassador Karran. I offer the floor to you now.
Thank you, United States. I think that if you take all of the proposals that I've made and make a totality of them, I think that when they're put together, they would paint a picture of an atmosphere within the organization that is going to improve staff morale. When you have, if you have a work environment where people feel they're better protected, they feel they have recourse to perceived problems, they have there's transparency, there's more transparency, there's more openness. I think that itself will do a lot to lift morale. I don't want to say what I would like to say is there are perceptions or allegations that these are problems that exist now. I do not know. If and when I do get in there, I will find out. But if that's the case, well then, I think that these proposals, when you put them together, they would solve a lot of those problems just by changing the atmosphere. I think that this itself would have a spin-off factor in people's attitudes, in their approach to their work. And as I have proposed, I think that I would recommend to the incoming Secretary General that this is an area we need to move very quickly on. We need to listen to the concerns of staff. We need to have the requisite meetings with maybe the Human Services Division. I think there's a staff association. As a new administration, you would want to apprise yourself of what the issues are. So let's bring them together, let's see what those issues are, and let's see how we can work and put systems in place or build or utilize the existing systems that exist in order to solve the whatever problems there are. I don't really believe that it's a very difficult task. To be honest with you, I feel that that with the new administration, whatever administration it would be, whether I'm elected or not, that it's not a difficult thing to solve, really, if you just put the right steps in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran. The last speaker on my list is delegation of Bolivia. I offer the floor to you now.
Gracias, Presidenta, y muy buenas tardes con todas y todos. En principio, quisiéramos agradecer la presentación realizada por el embajador Karran y atendiendo la solicitud realizada por la Presidencia, seré muy breve en la consulta. Permítanme dar lectura al artículo 70 de la Carta de la Organización, que señala: el Consejo Permanente de la Organización y el Consejo Interamericano para el Desarrollo Integral dependen directamente de la Asamblea General y tienen la competencia que a cada uno de ellos se asigna la Carta y otros instrumentos interamericanos, así como las funciones que encomiendan la Asamblea General y la reunión de consulta de ministros de Relaciones Exteriores. Como señala el artículo 70, a pesar de ser dos órganos que están en la misma jerarquía, es evidente que el CIDI no funciona como el Consejo Permanente. Coincidimos con su afirmación cuando señala que la OEA puede y debe hacer más en el área de desarrollo integral. Los temas sociales deben ser prioritarios, principalmente en la lucha de la pobreza. Embajador Karran, mi pregunta es, desde la Secretaría General Adjunta, cómo mejoraría y fortalecería el rol del CIDI. Gracias.
Thank you, Delegation of Bolivia, for your question. Ambassador Karran, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Bolivia. Well, this is a question that has been asked by many delegations for quite a few years now. I believe at one time Ambassador Ramdin had a proposal to make this to have a new formulation to make this an additional structure within the organization. I think that given the sentiment among member states about the need to do more in the area of integral development, we have to try to make CD more effective in terms of solving the development needs of member states. I recall that the candidate for Secretary General in his presentation did say that he had certain he had certain initiatives in mind when it comes to the integral development pillar. In fact, my question to him on that occasion was, well, where are we going to get the funding? And his response was that he has been in dialogue with development institutions and so on. I'm not sure whether the issue of CD is one only of structure or whether it is of effectiveness. I think there are probably two sides of the same coin, and effectiveness is the effectiveness improves when you get more financing to do more programs. So these are things. These are two aspects that need to be tackled as a whole. These are two aspects that need to be tackled in one, really. As regards the weight and the authority that is going to be given to CD, obviously, if you have both a Secretary General and an Assistant Secretary General who are supportive of this notion, and you have the backing of member states to do it, well, that's a reality that is going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Karran. There are no more requests for the floor, so I would now like to offer you the opportunity to present your concluding remarks, and yeah, you can do that from the roster then. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
It is better to stand and deliver remarks because then one has a more strategic vision. Chair, I'd like to thank you, and I wish to thank the member state representatives for the rich and frank discussions which we have just engaged in. There are some important conclusions we can draw from the discourse that we have just had. A few points which have come across clearly is that member states are deeply concerned. They're concerned about the future of this institution and about the capacity of this institution. At the technical level, they're concerned about the organization's managerial capability to function effectively, efficiently, and economically in order to fulfill its mandate. At the political level, they're skeptical about how much more the OAS would be able to accomplish in critical areas of democracy, human rights, development, and security. The political decisions of the OAS will always be taken by member states, and it will be for the organization to implement them. a major area of focus for the incoming Assistant Secretary General will be effective management, in order to ensure that the machinery is efficient and that there is effective implementation of the political decisions. That is why in my presentation I placed emphasis on improvements to the management of the OAS. In closing, I wish to say a few words about Guyana and the regional integration process. Guyana, whose physical location straddles the Atlantic coast of South America to the north and the Amazon rainforest to the south, is geographically, culturally, and politically a nation with dual Caribbean and Amazonian identities. From its inception as a nation, Guyana has maintained an unswerving commitment to the principles of regional integration, both within the nations of the Caribbean and among the wider hemisphere. Bilaterally and multilaterally, bonds of friendship and cooperation between Guyana, along with CARICOM and the countries of Latin America, are getting ever stronger, while the country has earned a reputation as the bridge between the English-speaking Caribbean and Latin America. Guyana is a small nation with wide ethnic, cultural, and religious diversity, and as we heard earlier, is the only English-speaking country in South America. Its political history is a microcosm of the evolution of many of the societies of the Americas, ranging from colonial past to Cold War intervention, left-wing dictatorship, democratic transition, and economic growth coupled with free market policies. Arising from its ideal geographic setting and rich cultural and political backgrounds, Guyana has developed balanced perspectives and approaches to the political, economic, and social questions facing the hemisphere today. The country's vision for the political, economic, and social progress of the Americas matches squarely with the ideals and programs of the Organization of American States. Guyana's resolve to work for joint solutions to common challenges lies at the heart of its commitment to the process of hemispheric integration. Guyana wishes to continue to contribute actively to this process. It is with these considerations in mind that Guyana has put forward this candidature. Evaluating the candidates for their suitability for leadership is an important exercise because that factor bears on many of the concerns that member states have displayed. Member states need to consider carefully what it is that the OAS needs at this time in terms of leadership. No organization can have effective management without effective leadership. The OAS needs leadership that would generate trust and confidence among permanent representatives and within their capitals, that the incoming leadership team can advance the hemisphere's interests. The organization will need a new leadership team with a bold and fresh commitment that has experience and competence in managing institutions. The next SG and ASG must command the respect and loyalty of the staff. They must select a dynamic and effective management team and inspire them to perform at their best. The OAS will go adrift unless its leadership applies the vision, experience, and determination to initiate the necessary reforms and see them through to their completion. Trustworthiness, confidence, adherence to ethical standards, and demeanor are relevant considerations also. The government of Guyana has put forward this candidature because it is aware of these requirements, and it is convinced that Guyana can make a positive contribution to this organization and to the hemisphere. To hold high office in the OAS is a great honor and privilege. But anyone who seeks to hold such office must be under no illusion about what the job would entail. They would have to reconcile the competing interests of member states and assist them in the complex task of finding common solutions to challenges which they are seeing from different perspectives. Such a person would be working for an entity that is overburdened and underappreciated. He or she would face difficult decisions at every turn, and their skills and patience would be severely tested. But that person would have the gratification of playing a part in realizing the most cherished aspirations of the peoples of the Americas through this institution, whose very existence is symbolic of their ideals. In helping to fulfill these aspirations, that individual would have the honor of working for and with the finest collection of diplomats that this hemisphere can assemble. I would be honored for the opportunity to put at your disposal the skills, capacity, and experience to make this vision a reality. Thank you.
It's the consideration of the items that have been scheduled on our order of business for this morning. On behalf of the Permanent Council, I would like to thank Ambassador Karran for sharing his ideas, his proposals, and the initiatives. We will now break for lunch, and I would like to make an appeal to that everybody returns at 2:45 so that we can continue on the remaining items of our agenda. Thank you so much.